Okay, welcome to a recap of week 2 of Tranche 3, phase 2 of the Undercover Policing Inquiry. This week's evidence exclusively was that of the undercover police officer Jim Boyling, who used the cover name Jim Sutton whilst he infiltrated a number of Amorites and saboteur groups, as well as Earth First, Reclaim the Streets. He deceived 3 women into intimate sexual relationships, having 2 children with one of them. This week's evidence was broadcast not in its entirety. I'm joined by Ben. How you doing, Ben? You all right? And we do have Bristle KRS, but it seems to be having some sort of technical problems for them to join us. Ben, what did you make of what we heard from Boyling last week?
Well, it was one of the better set of hearings to watch. I think he was one of those very arrogant, angry men who, while kind of not remembering lots of things, he was actually quite revealing. I think what he revealed wasn't necessarily true things. For example, one thing he that kind of was quite interesting. Here I have Kate Wilson.
Hello. And also Bristle KRS has just joined us.
Hello. So one thing that he said that was quite interesting, I thought, was when he talked about an SDS cliche, that when the SDS joined a group, they flourished, and he was talking specifically of articles, which
that was one of the last things he said on the Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, I think most people would agree that that's actually not, true of a group the SDS get involved in. Certainly not the case of in the case of Reclaim the Streets, when Jason Bishop joins the group. It is very much in decline and continues to decline with him in it. But nevertheless, it was quite an interesting thing to hear said.
Sure.
I don't know whether he believed it himself or not.
Bristle KRS has just joined us. Chris, what did you make of Jim Boyling overall last week? Oh, Chris, can you hear us? While we're waiting for Chris, Kate, what's your overall impressions of before we get into the nitty gritty of day by day?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be helpful to have an idea of where we stand with the restriction orders at this point before we start talking. For us to know what we can and cannot talk about, but also for the listeners to understand that there's a whole lot of stuff that we're not going to be able to talk about.
I mean, we're basically in the same position as earlier.
Because Tom's been in touch with the inquiry.
Okay. Yes, so I mean, I have attempted to make contact with the inquiry to get some specifics. On Wednesday afternoon, at the end of the hearings, I was brought in for a special hearing with Mitting, where I was reprimanded for some of the reporting that I did. I was made to delete some of my tweets. However, it turns out that I am not to be blamed, in the words of John Mitting, and that the things that I did report, though they were covered by reporting restriction order, I wasn't to know that that was the case in the specifics. We are not allowed to talk about anything at all that happened on Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning. These are blanket restriction orders. The reporting restriction orders are in place ostensibly to protect the private life of a number of core participants who we cannot name. However, the blanket restriction orders is a time-based one. What I got in trouble for, the things that I was tweeting that I got in trouble for, was not restricted information. It just happened in between the timestamps. So if anything was said on Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning, we cannot refer to it at all. There are a number of other shorter time periods where things were said which we're not allowed to report on. Now, one of those got me into trouble. One of those is a very short period where Jim Boyling was asked about his age, that he told Ruth, who was the second woman who he had a relationship with, how old he was. Ruth was some considerable years younger than he claimed to be. He was, in fact, a number of years older than he actually claimed to be. I cannot say the number of years that is to protect his privacy. But he was a number of years older than he claimed to be when he deceived these women into. All the women were much younger than him. Ruth considerably younger than him. But yeah, to protect his privacy, I'm not going to say that. Oh, we're also joined, I've just noticed, by Carolyn. How are you doing, Carolyn? So in terms of the restriction order, it's very important, not least for my ability to continue reporting on the inquiry, that we do not mention anything that was said on Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning. If you are unsure, please do not say it. It would appear that the current Assistant Solicitor of the Inquiry, Victoria O'Brien, who has now taken over as the main point of contact for all restriction orders, is taking a very authoritarian view of what restriction orders mean. It is a departure from how the inquiry has operated in the past. This appears to be because she is under pressure from police. She has personally communicated to me that she's under a lot of pressure from police, and she's doing whatever the police tell her to do. I find this very frustrating. I think that that's a dereliction of her actual job, but that's for another time. So when we talk about what happened, I mean, I figured we kind of go through it as we normally do with these recaps, kind of day by day. But we are going to have to stop at midday on Tuesday and then pick it up again on midday on Wednesday. So yeah, Carolyn just joined us. Karen, what's your overall impressions of what we heard from Jim Boyling week before last, before we get into the nitty gritty of what was said blow by blow?
Well, I suppose I'm in the same position as a lot of people who've been trying to follow this inquiry from elsewhere, because I wasn't in the hearing room, so I didn't get to hear any of the secret information. So there's no danger of me saying something I shouldn't say, because I don't know any of it. I didn't hear the same information the rest of you did.
I can't remember what was said at what point in the 3 days, so it's going to be incredibly hard to do this.
But it's been really frustrating. This is, I think, I've said to other people, this is the most frustrating week so far in the entire inquiry that I remember. And that's saying something, because there's been a lot of problems in the past.
Yeah, very much. It's the word. It has been one of those frustrating ones. We are also joined by Bristle KRS. Chris, can you hear us? But we can't hear you. Are you on mute?
Sorry. I forgot to plug my laptop in, so everything crashed and I had to reboot. Apologies.
Right. No worries. What was your overall impressions of Jim Boyling last week?
Well, I have to say he's coming across as lovable as you might think from all of the previous reporting. He's not really doing himself many favors by attempting to come across as likable or someone that's deserving of our understanding. He's really going in hard on being as obnoxious as possible, really.
Yeah, he has been incredibly obnoxious. He was questioned by David Barr KC, which I can see is like the Premier League of being questioned at the Undercover Policing Inquiry. And he started off with a Barr kind of expanding on this idea that Jim Boyling said the attraction of living the lifestyle as a full-time Reclaim the Streets activist was an opportunity to be another version of himself. He talks about this existential experiment. Barr would come back to this repeatedly throughout the questioning. I can't say whether or not he did it during the closed period, but he did it lots through the open period, such as the nature of the reporting restriction orders. I can't even report whether he did that during that period, which is insane. I think one of the most interesting things that we heard at the very beginning on the morning of the Monday was that Boyling opened very early on by saying that he was aware of SDS officers having sexual relationships whilst they were deployed undercover, and that he knew this before he joined the SDS. He thinks he knew before he joined Special Branch. Certainly, it was common knowledge inside Special Branch that this was the case. Now, I mean, it sounds fairly mundane, really, but this is a huge departure from what we've heard from the majority of undercover officers. Does anybody want to comment on that? I think that's quite a big deal.
I mean, it's massive. I think so. I believe that we can say that in his witness statement's online, right? Oh God, this is a fucking minefield. This is ridiculous. In his witness statement, towards the end of his witness statement, you see that Jim Boyling is extremely angry. He is extremely angry because he is the only officer to have specifically lost his job for misconduct in public office while he was undercover because of things that he did and relationships that he had. And he's furious about this. He thinks it is hypocritical and unfair. And, you know, to a certain extent it is, because we know that a lot of them did this and we know that a lot of them knew about it. But what it means is that he is not towing the thin blue line on this. I mean, but it's interesting because it's true that when actually asked who he talked to about it, he did appear to fall back into that thing of only naming officers who were dead or officers who were already discredited.
Well, ones they didn't like very much, like Peter Francis.
Yeah. What was very interesting, actually, in his witness statement, he says that he spoke to Andy Coles about the sexual relationships. When that's put to him, like very early on, he's like, oh, I'm not sure. I wouldn't like, if he says we didn't, then I wouldn't contradict him. And tries to really roll back on things that he said in his written statement. There's a bit of a theme here about the written statement and things he then says when he's being questioned.
As for like towing the line, I mean, I think he's very much on the other side of the thin blue line. When asked about sexism or racism within the force, it was kind of okay to throw the uniformed officers under the bus a little bit, but basically he was very much towing the line on. In fact, he's more in denial than the official line of the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police himself, going so far as to express his disgust for the apology expressed by the Commissioner on the behaviour to women.
Yeah, and so jumping ahead on those things, I'll just play the clip rather than talk about it of what he said about racism.
Were there ever any racist jokes told by anyone
No.
within the SDS at any time?
No. The SDS wasn't even, just by the by, wasn't an all-white unit for all the time I was on it either. So.
Were racial slurs ever used?
No.
Did you ever encounter any racism within the MPS?
Yeah. When I finished university and joined the police, and I went to Brixton in 1986. By modern standards, Brixton would still have had elements of stereotyped attitudes, quite endemic at times. Yeah.
When you say Brixton, do you mean Brixton Police Station?
Yeah, Brixton Division. I was at Brixton Division.
And how endemic was it?
I mean, endemic was it? I mean, not throughout the station. There was a good ethnic mix amongst the officers coming in, but there was still some what I might describe as very old school attitudes there, I think.
Do you mean not a euphemism for racist?
Yeah, it probably is, isn't it?
And other than Brixton Police Station, did you encounter any other racism in the MPS before joining Special Branch?
Well, I was at Brixton from 86 to 91, and then I went straight into Special Branch. And Special Branch had a far higher educational level. I don't know how else to say. It wasn't the same attitudes as you would get on Borough.
I'm going to come to Special Branch, but I'm obviously...
I went straight from Brixton to Special Branch.
But in terms of when you were training, any police officers you came into contact with?
Not that I remember.
Outside Brixton?
No.
Special Branch. You joined in July 1991.
That sounds about right.
Did you encounter any racism in Special Branch?
No.
None at all?
Not that I was aware of. I mean, I'm a white officer, so it might have been different if I wasn't, but no, I not in my presence.
And how educated were you in things like definitions of racism at that time?
Definitions of racism? I'm not sure that we were at all.
So in terms of your ability to spot anything other than very clear, overt racism, what would your capacity have been to detect things like indirect racism or subtle racism?
Strange to say, but I don't think people were particularly aware of those nuances in 1991.
In the circles in which you were mixing.
Well, yeah. Sort of subconscious bias and all that such like that wasn't really a thing in 1991.
Not really a thing in 1991, apparently. Yeah, I'm not entirely convinced.
No, I think that clip's really interesting because putting the racism thing aside for a minute, you see the ways that he answered the questions. And there were a couple of kind of personas that he had when answering the questions, and none of them rang very true. I don't quite know how to put it, but there was this nah, where he would just say no to things before even letting Barr finish the question, which is how he started answering. And then there's this, sort of thoughtful, I'm considering this persona that he puts on, and you can kind of see in that clip he sort of starts off by doing his dismissive no, I object to this line of questioning, and then kind of does a bit of a backtrack and goes, oh, hang on a minute, no, this is like, it's going to look really bad if I act like I don't care about racism, and then starts giving these sort of really theatrically considered answers to the question, and it was like that all the way through. Obviously, I can't comment on bits we can't comment on, but essentially that's what his evidence was like. He was either dismissively angry about the answers, or he was doing this very contrived, I'm being thoughtful and trying to be helpful with my answers, both of which were incredibly irritating.
Yeah. Yeah, just to kind of go through. Has anybody else got any comments on that racism thing, Carolyn?
It's the modern standards. He's like, it might be considered racist by modern standards. No, it was considered racist back in 1986 by the people of Brixton. It's not just modern standards at all. It was just any right-thinking person by that point knew what police racism looked like and felt like and was against it.
1981, when the people of Brixton kicked off against the police at Brixton Police Station, it was very, very clear.
And in the 70s, it was very, very clear. It's. I think that these cops think that they inhabit some different timeline to the normal society around them because their attitudes are out of date. And still are.
I think we had this like right from the very start of the inquiry. Officers going back to the 60s, going, "Oh, it was a different time. It was a different time." But I think, one of the first civilian witnesses, Diane Langford, really just skewered that straight away when she was being questioned about it, and she kind of just name checked a load of people like James Baldwin, Malcolm X, all these people who were part of public discourse at the time were very publicly kind of criticizing this racism for what it was right way back then. Just quickly, I've noticed there's 27 people watching. Only 5 of you have liked. If you can like this broadcast, if you can share it, if subscribe, all the usual guff. I hate saying it, but please, it does make a huge difference how visible we are. If you're able to restream it, I know that I'd forgotten about this, but the 3 of you were given the opportunity to restream this stream when you joined. If you're able to do that, it would be massively helpful in getting this out to a wider audience. But yeah, it's a nonsense, isn't it? Just going back through the sort of in chronological order, Boyling claimed that he read the files when he was in the back office before he was deployed, and that both Chitty and John Dines' file were very well documented on the sexual relationships they had, and we haven't seen these documents in the inquiry, which is quite interesting. When he was first deployed, he had a fake girlfriend in Copenhagen. This was, he said, because Lambert had advised him, Bob Lambert, the former undercover officer who was now head of the unit, was now his manager, it'll help you avoid having sex whilst deployed undercover to have a fake girlfriend. This apparently didn't last particularly long. And so when we see his first reports, he's infiltrating the Eastlands and Animal Rights. Now he claims this is part of his attempt to get access to a hunt sab group, which is an insane way of getting access to a hunt sab group, and complete opposite of what other undercover officers said about infiltrating animal rights and getting into hunt sabs. It's normally you go into a hunt sab group to infiltrate the animal rights group. He goes to the animal rights group to infiltrate the hunt sabs. Make that make sense. And he claims this is all part of Operation Gant. Now, Operation Gant is, there's a lot to unpack with Operation Gant. Essentially, it's to do with incendiary devices being used against people connected with hunting in Essex.
No, it's not. This is like Boyling's.
Yes. Did someone want to explain Operation Gant?
In Tranche 2 disclosure, there is a couple of documents mentioning Operation Gant. One of them is an SDS annual report from 95 or 96, 97. And the other is a 2013 witness statement from Jeff Lurie in SO13, the counter-terrorism unit. And he describes, while talking about Operation Sparkler, the operation investigating the Debenhams bombing and Bob Lambert's involvement in the incendiary attacks there, he says that Operation Gant was a separate operation running in parallel at the same time.
So back in the mid-1980s.
So we're talking about 87 or earlier, involving a series of 50 incendiary device attacks, mostly on butchers in East London. That's an incredible number of attacks. And I have searched animal rights publications, media, communiques, etc., from that period, and media, including local media in East London, and have found nothing that remotely resembles that. You know, you'll find butchers' windows getting smashed and daubed with paint, you know, meat is murder or whatever. But 50 incendiary device attacks, that would be news. I can't find anything about it at all. So it's a series of attacks, an operation, an investigation, 10 years before it's used as the pretext for Jim Boyling's deployment. And it then becomes something to do with Essex hunters. Because
that's who he's infiltrating.
Yeah, a lot of this does make no sense whatsoever. We then got to another section of the hearings which were suspended from broadcast, and because there was a temporary restriction order in place that related to Ben. That's been lifted. Sorry. It was all a bit complicated. Rather than us go over it again, it relates to the Good Easter case. And there's been a short video made which kind of hopefully covers that so that we don't have to again. But
one of the things that
actually the
has come up a few times.
Sorry, go on, Ben. Do you want to?
The restriction order was not to do with the Good Easter thing. It was to do with Gant. There was a restriction order linking my name to Gant. I didn't actually want it. I asked them to not have it. They said it was too late. I managed to get rid of it by the mid-morning break. That's why there was some of the stuff missing.
We had quite a hilarious sort of video thing where we like wanted to talk about it, couldn't, and then came back and was able to talk about it in the second video. So if you want to, these are some of the highlights from that period of reacting to it and some of the stuff.
Is this issue from early on where he was deployed into the Hunt Sabs and he was present where a number of Hunt Sabs were arrested. Essex Hunt was a particularly nasty, violent hunt where I think the description was you could basically expect to be arrested before midday, and that's exactly what happened.
Were you given any parameters before that event as to your how you could behave?
No.
Was your handler anywhere nearby?
No.
Any handler anywhere nearby?
Don't think so.
Were you given any assurances you wouldn't be arrested?
No.
Boyling was there and they didn't show the video. And it's very interesting watching Boyling's actions because actually there's a number of arrests. I think 4 people were arrested in a car park. And Boyling was not arrested. But interestingly, he's actually the only person you see in the videos who fights the cops. And he does it more than once.
Yes.
And everyone else is just kind of standing around. And every time Boyling wades in and they pull their buttons and they rip his clothes and they beat him out the way and then they arrest someone else.
Yeah, it was interesting as well, I thought, that one of the questions he was asked was whether he'd had any particular briefing before that Good Easter hunt of what he was allowed to do. because, as you say, he acts like really like. I mean,
he acts like Mark Kennedy, frankly.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And I'm kind of. It got me thinking: is it a case of the fact that these undercover officers are presented with the reality of what it's like of dealing with cops in these situations, and then they go, "What the fuck? This is fucking insane. Fuck off. You can't fucking behave like this. Fuck you."
Yeah.
And then they react in like a normal human reaction, which us as activists have learned to suppress because we
know that there's a long list of like resisting arrest, assaulting a police officer.
Right. Because they're undercover cops, they kind of get away with it. But in those moments, they're like it's just this normal human reaction to the fucking abusive,
fucking
behavior.
outrageous.
Yes, exactly. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
The suggestion of like why he didn't get arrested for that maybe is the fact that the unit is not quite as secret as they make out it is, and that the arresting officers on the day had more of an idea of what his actual role was than he claims they did.
Yeah. See at some point in one of these videos that actually there's a piece of paper on the dashboard that's reflected in the windshield that has the number plates of the vans that the hunt sabs who are being arrested are in, which means that they obviously had some prior intelligence, the uniform cops who were there that day, of who was expected to be there, and may well have gone in with plans to. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions that remain. There's a lot of questions that weren't asked. What was interesting in the evidence today is he walks away from that day, but he did offer to be a witness for the defence, and he was there at the courthouse, outside the courthouse on the day, and it is our belief that he was actually there, prepared to take the witness stand if necessary. And there is a written statement that was drafted. It's not signed, and quite interestingly, at the beginning of his evidence, he basically accuses Bindmans of quite serious misconduct.
That Mike Schwartz.
This is a draft unsigned witness statement about the incident. Is it right that you in fact must have had a conversation with Mr. Schwartz, provided a witness statement and been sent a draft?
No. I wasn't even aware there was a statement till it was on Newsnight about 10 years ago that I was supposed to have given this statement, and I haven't read it before.
Were you aware that the man who was offering to appear on behalf of the man you were defending as a defence witness, Mr. Sutton, was an undercover police officer?
I'm not prepared to enter into that discussion.
You say 6 cases a year, that's 15 years ago. Who knows, there could be dozens and dozens of similar cases involving undeclared undercover police officers.
Was there ever any discussion that you can recall about whether or not your identity as a UCO should be disclosed to either the criminal or the civil courts?
No.
Or to the prosecutors or the civil defence team?
Don't think so.
Did your managers know that you were going to support the defendants at the criminal trial?
Yeah, I would have told them that unquestionably. Yeah.
And did they say anything at all about
the advice
protecting you?
Oh, no.
We've seen the draft witness statement, and I understand your evidence is you don't.
I didn't write it.
You don't recall writing it.
Well, my evidence is that I didn't write it.
Or provide the instructions from which it was written up.
Not in terms of the content. I think I was asked if I would be willing to give a statement. I said yes, I'd be willing to give a statement. But then the statement that you've got, I didn't write, and it wasn't written in my presence.
Were you given any instructions about what sort of account you should give if you were ever asked to provide a witness statement?
No. The advice would be to try to avoid giving one if you possibly can, and I always did manage to avoid having to give one.
I'm exploring whether there was ever any discussion that you should give an account that wouldn't actually be helpful to the defence.
No.
What's interesting is we had one of those fairly rare things, an interjection from John Mitting himself asking a question about this very topic. And I wasn't left with any doubt that John Mitting believes that Mike Schwartz actually didn't falsify the witness statement, and that in fact...
I mean, Boyling did when he said this. He said, my own solicitors have said that this is very unlikely, but this is my belief about this. And he did eventually withdraw that belief and say that okay, maybe he did give an account over. But
he doesn't remember.
But he's just forgotten it.
Yeah.
If my recollection is at odds with a very large firm of lawyers, then I'm going to have to say perhaps my recollection is incorrect.
Yeah.
But,
That's all I wanted to hear. If there was a reason for doubting that the normal practice of their firm and most firms was followed when preparing a witness statement, then I wanted to hear it from you.
Okay, I will bow to their perhaps more minuted recollection then.
I climbed down then, I would say, from Boiling over that particular issue.
One of many.
Yeah.
One of many, yeah. Anybody got any thoughts on that particular, anything they want to add about that particular topic?
I found it, there's a question there where Barr says, what I'm getting at is, what I want to know is, was there any advice about writing a statement that wouldn't help the defense? The idea that perhaps you offer a statement, but it's kind of useless, and that any defense team worth their salt wouldn't actually use it, and therefore you've kind of been seen to be helpful, but at the end of the day, they're not going to call you. And he wasn't called. There is, however, that statement was given to Keir Starmer, the barrister who would have been defending in court that day. And I've done a bit of a analysis of this on Twitter, but one of the key features of his statement is when he mentions and repeats the police line in their arresting officer statements, where he says there were children in the car park who came over to see what all the fuss was about. Seems like a fairly innocent thing, except this is a public order section 4 and 5 offences, which require there to be people, members of the public in the vicinity, to feel threatened by the behaviour. So he actually makes the police case in his defence statement.
And it's worth noting that there is extensive video of this event, and there are no children in the car park. The only people who make any mention of these children are the police witnesses, be that the uniformed officers who were giving evidence for the prosecution, or the witness statement from the undercover officer that was given to the defence. So that mention of the children in the car park who did not exist is quite significant.
Yeah.
And the only people we can see in the car park are either hunt sabs or police officers. There's no other members of the public at all.
Which makes it not a section 4 or 5 public order offence, because the police are not supposed to.
And in fact, in court, it was the police video that undermined their case. So all the police arresting officer statements were written together. You can see in the police notebooks, they were all written at exactly the same time, 7 hours after the event. And then their witness statements all contain the hilarious made-up dialogue of people saying, "Oh, I love the smell of cooking pig." Yeah, there's nothing worse than an Essex pig, and just some hilarious dialogue that they've.
Is this the militant vegan saying this?
This is the militant vegans,
yeah. Okay.
So, like, it was all clearly written together, but without them having the benefit of watching their own police video, which was then shown in court and completely contradicted everything they said. So it was actually a really easy. I at the time I thought we got off because justice, but now I'm thinking, perhaps,
you sweet summer child.
Now I'm.
We missed the defence barrister. The quality.
I defended myself, and I got off 24 hours before those represented by Keir Starmer, which I thought at the time was quite a impressive feat. But in the benefit of hindsight, it might have had something to do with the prosecution worried about the involvement of an undercover cop, and they just wanted it out of the way.
Yeah, this was around the same time as well that Boyling's report that he submitted on the 3rd of December 1995, a topic that he would return to many times, an incident he seemed to, a reoccurring incident in his life of a huntsman being pulled off his horse, sometimes remixed to be a police officer pulled off his horse.
Exactly.
Here's a little video about that.
Report dated the 3rd of December 1995 about a Hunt Saboteur Association meeting, the Essex Regional meeting. Could we have the 3rd paragraph down, please? I'll give you a moment to refresh your memory, but it's the passage about the huntsman being pulled from his horse and the person believed to be responsible that I'm interested in.
Okay.
You've written, he believed to be the person responsible for the attack was not present at the meeting and could not defend the action. Were you an eyewitness to the huntsman being pulled off his horse?
I don't remember this at all.
Did anybody...
Possibly. Possibly I was. I was present at a lot of SABs, but...
Well, it says believed to be.
Yeah.
If you'd been an eyewitness, presumably it would have been put much more...
Well, if I'd seen the attack, I might have been present at the event, but not seen this incident, is what I meant.
Did anyone tell you that they had personally witnessed me doing that?
I don't remember, sorry.
Another fine bit of police evidence there, which obviously stands up really well on its own. I mean, this was something he came back to a couple of times. He claims to have seen police officers pulled off horses, other huntsmen pulled off. I mean, he was quite dismissive that time, but later on he was like, "Oh yes, many times, many times." This was couldn't tell you where because it was such a common event.
I mean, I really think this actually needs somebody to go and investigate and ask police forces, right, when have you ever had police officers pulled off horses, and get some statistics? Because I really do not believe it happens as often as Boyling claimed.
I've never seen anybody pulled off a horse.
Yeah, it's quite hard to do because horses are quite big.
Yeah.
And they have hooves.
I've seen hunters come off of horses.
Yes, and I've seen videos of police officers
pull them off of a horse.
Yeah. So there's quite famous cases where police officers have fallen off horses in the course of their duties, sometimes in riot situations where the horse has gone crazy and bucked and run off down the street. And quite often, injured protesters that are walking around in the street, or members of the public walking around in the street, as well as police officers, and the police officers have then sued the police for some kind of injury compensation afterwards. So I'm sure there are figures available for those incidents, but I haven't come across a single situation where protesters have pulled an officer off a horse.
Information request in the making.
Yeah.
Including somebody used to ask Avon in Somerset Constabulary because I think he claimed this happened in Bristol Street Party as well, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yes, I was there at the time, and I recall being in court as someone was accused of something in relation to the female mounted officer. In Boyling's evidence, he initially conflates it with a male officer, but it was 100% a female officer. We recognised her at many events after that. There was also a variation at Bristol of the old hoary syringes used as darts. Where the claim was that after the horses were returned to the stables, one of the officers there noticed that there was a syringe stuck in the saddle, indicative of someone having thrown a hypodermic syringe, aiming at the horse to try and injure the horse. Not quite sure why someone would be throwing syringes at horses or what the possible effect of that might be. but yeah, the person that was accused of the incident with the mounted officer, that they weren't convicted or anything. It was put before the court, and nothing came of it. So he was there. He put some little juicy bits of detail into his statement, but certainly there was no clear-cut a protester pulled an officer off of a horse. It was slightly chaotic scenes, but yeah, not as he described it,
and probably not something he had actually seen. There were lots of times when he seems to be referring to things that he had read in the paper after an event.
And it was in the Bristol Evening Post. So and they were Bristol Evening Post had full coverage for weeks beforehand and weeks afterwards. It was a very big local news event. He wouldn't have had to have even got the story off of someone else that he spoke to. He could have literally just read it in the Bristol Evening Post.
I mean, so many things that he said, either under oath during the hearing or in his witness statement, which is also a signed witness statement. He's supposed to be truthful in it, where he's had to roll back, where it's become so obvious that it's just made up. So, for example, even his original deployment, he claimed that he found all these ALF people, and then had to admit that actually, in all of the time he was deployed and undercover and hanging out with these people, he never knew of any instance of them doing any sort of ALF type behavior. But he knew they must be ALF because he'd read it in a file. And then he was asked about the sort of attacks, the incendiary attacks or whatever that he claimed he was there to report on. He had to admit that during his entire deployment, there wasn't a single case of anything like that ever happening. And this happened again and again.
I mean, and this is a recurring theme with the spy cops that we've seen giving evidence, where there are serious allegations made in the reports. And it's quite rare. I mean, it's remarkably rare that serious allegations actually are made in SDS reports. Most of them are utter drivel or deeply personal information. But ever so occasionally, the inquiry comes across allegations that people are involved in planning violence against other people, or involved in incendiary device attacks or damage to property. And, obviously part of the terms of reference of the inquiry is to go into those potential justifications for the undercover policing. So they do ask a lot of questions about these incidents where there's an allegation. And I have yet to hear an undercover officer come back with specifics about an actual crime. I mean, it was with James Thompson when he was, he's talking about people plotting revenge attacks against the driver of the vehicle that ran over a hunt sab. He can't give a single detail. Bob Lambert, when he was asked about some of the ALF stuff that he alleges in his reporting or in his witness statement, it's all vague, and it's vague because they know that as soon as they start to give details about this stuff, people can disprove it. And there have been instances where there have been specifics in allegations, either dates or locations, or just enough information to enable you to go and find the reporting from the time about the crime. And invariably, that has led to people being able to say, well, yeah, no, I definitely wasn't there. Look, I can show you I was somewhere else.
The only stories we've heard of violence that actually, to me, do sound credible and do sound like they really did happen were the stories of there were some Hunt supporters that brandished shotguns at the Hunt Sabs. There was a drunken Hunt supporter that drove a vehicle deliberately towards some Hunt Sabs, to knock them down. I have no doubt at all that those incidents happened.
And yet we in his witness statement, I hope, there's reference to the high quality or first class intelligence relating to violent hunt sabs in Essex. There's no reporting that kind of correlates with that claim at all. In fact, there's reports referring to the violence melded out by the Hunt supporters. I think his deployment is unique in that he starts his deployment with a fantasy arson attack plot, rather than uses it to prolong his operation towards the end, which is a pattern we have seen played out. What we've never seen is right at the beginning of an operation, like this, really big thing, major criminal accusation, and then it just fizzled out and completely disappears. And he goes on to, being deployed to police sandpits in a street. It's very bad, very bizarre.
And I think the key to that oddity is Bob Lambert. So this
yet
again. So Bob Lambert was Jim Boyling's mentor. Jim Boyling was deployed into East London Animal Rights, which, if you remember, was the organisation that Jackie, the woman that Lambert deceived into a relationship and had a child with, that was the organisation that she was involved with. It was the organisation that Lambert had spied on in the 1980s. And he sends Boyling in there on the basis that he is supposed to be investigating this operation, which has also been going on since the 1980s. And as far as we know, there were no arrests ever made under the auspices of Operation Gant. And once Boyling is in there and claiming to genuinely be finding intelligence about these animal rights extremists, he's pulled out and he's sent to spy on Reclaim the Streets, who at the time were all. I mean, Reclaim the Streets did some very, very large demonstrations later on, but actually Boyling was involved in the organisation of all of those demonstrations. At the point where he is deployed into Reclaim the Streets, they had done two very nice street parties, one in Camden, one in Islington. There is this kind of sense in the undercover officers' approach to this, and I think we'll see more of it on Monday, tomorrow, when Jason Bishop gives evidence that the anti-capitalists and the major public disorder that was seen later on in the 1990s totally justified these deployments, and what they're ignoring is the chronology. That actually, Boyling was deployed out of the ALF into Reclaim the Streets, which at the time was a relatively small, although quite exciting, environmental direct action group. And once he's in there, he starts getting involved in organising what do become major public order events. And, there was the March for Social Justice in 1997. There was June 18th in 1999.
Just before you move on to that, I think it's just really important. He didn't infiltrate the ALF. He infiltrated an animal rights group who he claimed members of which were in the ALF.
He went
interesting as well.
He went to two meetings.
And he claims. He claims that
and claims very quickly. He claims very quickly that they had discussions and wrote them off as being possible suspects. He went to two public meetings of this group and decided, what did they do? They all come up to him afterwards over tea and biscuits and said, no.
Interestingly as well, he claims the way that he was able to infiltrate Reclaim the Streets is that he saw somebody on a hunt sab who was also one of the hunt sabs who he recognized from the photographs of Reclaim the Streets to know that they had attended Reclaim the Streets, and he therefore spent the day getting in conversation with them until that person invited him to an RTS meeting. And that was the way that he, as a super detective, was able to secretly get into the public meetings that were very publicly announced by Reclaim the Streets every week.
I mean, this is a recurring theme. He did the other thing that he claimed was, as you said, that he couldn't get into the hunt sabs without first of all infiltrating the animal rights group in order to get into the hunt sabs. We know that Boyling ran stalls for the hunt sab group once he'd successfully got into this secret group. He ran stalls which recruited members of the public from the street to join the hunt sab group, and that is how most people will have got involved in hunt sab groups, is through the stalls that they ran, where they would invite people to come along with them. It's just this absolute nonsense, and you have to wonder whether their intelligence was so bad that they believed this stuff themselves.
No, because that's actually it contradicts the SDS line of this traditional, well-trodden path of using hunt sabs to get to the ALF and the extreme wing of animal rights. Like, it's described again and again and again that the hunt saboteurs is a gateway to the ALF. He does it the opposite way around.
No, I was thinking more about his insistence that Reclaim the Streets was a closed group.
Yes.
So so he, in the 22nd December 95 report, which is the first Boyling report on Reclaim the Streets, he said the reason why supposedly this pivot happens is that he reports they were planning systemic attempts to cause serious traffic obstruction in a given area. So, worth dropping the bombing campaign, animal rights extremism, there was going to be some serious traffic obstruction in a given area, and Jim Boyling was on the fucking case. Now, this, as is the case with David Barr, anytime he kind of he started the topic of Reclaim the Streets, and then very quickly pivoted to the fact that Jim Boyling is a married man. All undercover officers had to be married men in order to be brought into the SDS, that his wife had left him. And that he only told his bosses about this in the August of 96. His wife had left him in the January of 96. He asked him why he left it so long, to which Boyling uttered the immortal words, "Is this really relevant?" Yes, Jim, we're going to be talking about your personal life, how very unpleasant for you, for your personal life to be somehow violated in this way as to someone to talk about it. He was very unhappy about being asked this question. He was asked if his undercover deployment was the reason for the marriage falling apart. He said you'd have to ask her, and he blames her for the end of the marriage. He said he didn't tell his bosses that she'd left him 7 months earlier because he didn't want to give a running commentary on his private life. He was quite pointed in this, the suggestion that there could be some sort of, how dare the inquiry look into his private life? Very strange. Of course,
how dare they look into his private life is because fairly shortly after his wife leaves him is when he starts deceiving the women that he's spying on into sexual relationships. There is no, chronology is not necessarily causation, but it's fairly damning circumstantial evidence, certainly.
Yeah, and that response gets used a lot throughout the days that I heard anyway. Oh, you have to ask her, you have to ask Bob Lambert, you have to ask him, you have to ask the office, you have to ask the activist. So ask anyone, just don't ask me. Very much.
Can I ask you something, Caroline? Because I was going to mention something, and then I realised I have no idea what day or part of the evidence it was given in, so I might not actually be able to say it. But do you...
Please do not break any restriction orders on this stream. It would ruin my life.
No, we're not going to do that.
I can't even ask you if you recall it being said.
I am going to go through all the topics in chronological order. I've got extensive notes, so hopefully it'll come up in. We've only got till 1 o'clock on Monday so far, and we are 1 hour in.
So while we're still on day one, the one thing I did want to mention was that he talked about how he joined this online Amanzi network, and then he was asked some questions about the misuse of computers, and he claimed that, again, it was the very early days of the internet. Now, I know that I'm not the only person here who was online significantly years before this and using the internet, involved in various online things, as far back as 1992, and people in the 80s and 70s and so on. But Jim Boyling had a law degree, the law surrounding this.
Yes, I
Which
think
I found
we might have
amazing.
lost Carolyn for a bit there, but I think the point she was making was that Jim Boyling had a degree in law from Cardiff University, no less, quite a prestigious law school. So he should have really known the law about this. This wasn't like a different time.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you managed to hear all that, but basically he was claiming that computers were like basically in the infancy in 1995, which is not true.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was quite interesting actually. I mean, this was the first foray into like anything about computers we've heard about the from the SDS. And yeah, he talked about it as if it was some sort of wizardry that other people wouldn't understand.
But Andy Coles had already been using computers earlier as well. We've heard all about that.
And just to jump in there, one of the big issues with the acceleration of the Animal Rights National Index in 1986 was bringing Colin Wiggins in with his paper records from Essex and computerizing it. There was a round robin sent to corporations in 1986 lauding the fact that Special Branch had computerized all of their own records in relation to animal rights groups and activists at that time. So this is 10 years prior to Jim Boyling being deployed undercover. SDS would have been fully aware of this level of importance of computer records from their own perspective, because they were feeding their own reports into the army computerized system through their own information routes. So the notion that this was all kind of some amazing new technology that had come out of nowhere, and he had no expectations of what the rules and regulations around information flow is, just beggars belief, really.
And it's something we're going to see a lot more of as we go forward, is their misuse of the internet and the, I mean, ironically, there's the rules around interfering with people's communications, interfering with people's telephones, computers, even post, are a lot tighter than the rules around infiltration and undercover policing. And so, when it comes to this kind of, accessing people's computers, and we see passwords being shared, that's something that I've
messages
seen.
being forwarded.
Yeah, and Mark's was passing people's emails straight to his handler, and the law around this stuff is actually a lot clearer. So hopefully it's going to be quite easy to pin some of these officers down around the misconduct.
And the stuff around like the Royal Mail is really, really old law, and even Boyling won't be able to pretend that was some newfangled thing that he wasn't aware of.
Just quickly, we've got 101 people watching. Only 13 have liked. If you're able to like this, or share it, or retweet it, or send it to your friends in your WhatsApp group, please do so. It makes a huge difference to how many people see these broadcasts, how far they go. It really, really would help. If you've got any questions, please leave a comment, and they will come up. I will share them on screen. We will talk about them. So we've just got to the chronologically to the afternoon of the Monday, and this was really where the questioning of Reclaim the Streets really kind of got underway properly. He started off talking about the M41, Reclaim the Streets of July '96, about how he was one of he wasn't in the core group, but he was a driver of one of the sound system trucks. He talked about supposedly this Islington Street party that got violent, that supposedly was the trigger for him infiltrating, and how that as a group that RTS was avoiding that violence. He said that by not provoking the police. They were going to avoid violence by not provoking police, which I think says a lot about where the actual violence came from.
Sneaky bastards.
Yeah. I mean, like, so according to its reports, it said that as Reclaim the Streets parties tail off, crusties may become confrontational. And Jim Boyling was appalled. This couldn't be his report. He wouldn't possibly ever say anything as dehumanizing as crusty. So I mean, he went into a big thing about how none of these reports were written by him. He knows that because he never wrote things down. Apart from when we get to June the 18th, where he did write some stuff down. But for the most part, all his reporting was done orally. He would speak to his handler, and the handler would write them up. So therefore, he can't be held responsible for anything that's in the reports because he's not the person who did the typing. This was a theme that actually we've heard from so many of the undercover officers. He talked about the fact that stolen materials were used on the M41 protest. He says he knows they were stolen because he stole some of it. He said that no one was arrested for that, nothing was returned, and it wasn't his job to report theft that he took part in. He seemed quite sort of relaxed about that. He said that he witnessed missiles being thrown at the police and a full-on confrontation at the end of the M41 street party. He had a whole story about him like leaving with the sound system. He talked about particular elements from the likes of class war coming to piggyback RTSs to have a confrontation with the cops. We saw some other reports about his involvement. One from August '96, an action on the Pinkerton Security Office. This was the second wave of the RTS, he said, which he was more involved in. This was in solidarity with the Newbury bypass campaign. And then we got to his relationship with Monica, who was the first woman who he deceived into an intimate relationship. We heard from her, you may remember, we've recapped it already. She gave evidence the week before, was questioned about the deceptive relationship he had with her. It's very clear that she was an activist within Reclaim the Streets. We see her being mentioned in many reports. He tries to distance himself from that. As they said, well, she was a bit of an activist, very much on the fringes. We were shown an action of August '96 against Transport for London, which was in solidarity action with the underground workers who were on strike. We saw that he got arrested at that, and there was a lot of question about that. He said that managers thought that SDS officers getting arrested for public order offences was a good thing, providing they weren't charged. And we saw his report, which had a scribble on it by Docker saying, "Seen and enjoyed, well done, Jim." This sort of sense that because there was no charges brought, that it was actually quite a positive thing for an undercover officer to get themselves arrested.
Hold on. Didn't he go to court?
He did, absolutely.
So there must have been charges brought. Yes. He got off.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, he was at, so I mean, this is where it stood. There was a belief that there would be no charges brought, so everybody was very happy about this. But as it turns out, yes, he does end up in court. He breaches personal legal professional privilege, passing on this information to his managers of the meeting between the solicitor and the clients. He claims to remember none of this at all. It was the trial was in January '97. He gave evidence as a defendant. No consideration about misleading the court. He tried to play down the legal advice that he received alongside other defendants from Mike Schwartz. He claims that his account in court was truthful, as if the fact that he was pretending to be somebody else, acting as an undercover officer, didn't really matter because he was truthful and everyone was acquitted anyway. It was put to him that Edmondson had no qualms about one of his undercover officers appearing in court in a false identity. Jim Boyling was in complete agreement. There were no concerns about that taking place. We've shown a minute from Eric Docker saying how pleased he was with Boyling's performance in court. He said it wasn't unusual for an undercover officer to be arrested and to appear in court. He knows of no case where the court was informed about the status of the undercover officer. We then looked at reports about a street party in Brighton, August '96. Boyling says he wasn't involved in the planning, but went down a few days before to help out with other RTS activists from London. He gives a comment within that it would be better for the static street party to go ahead than to deal with a rolling confrontation. As it turns out, Police in Brighton decide to go with a rolling confrontation. Doesn't go that well. Lots of police charging the crowd. He refers to it as a running battle, people throwing missiles at police. So the report claims that there was very little damage to property. This despite the fact that Boyling was going on about he witnessed criminal damage to property on the running battle. We were then shown a copy of the Osmantius Sabotage Skills Manual, which the inquiry didn't want anybody to see. You can Google it. I don't think I'm breaking any kind of restriction orders for that.
It's on archive.org.
Yeah, it's on. I mean, it's in a number of places. Yeah, I mean, you know, this was treated as if it was some sort of like bomb-making manual. We saw some reports about Reclaim the Future in Liverpool from September '96, where he learned of a plan to shut the railway into the docks with scaffolding. This was reported to Lambert, and the scaffolding in a truck outside the university was apprehended and intercepted and didn't go ahead. He was involved in cutting the fences to get onto the dock site. He talked about how very aggressive the local police were towards the dockers and the RTS activists. This was the connection between the Liverpool dockers who were on strike at the time and the RTS activists. I think it's a really important bit of our history, which was kind of, I mean, just as a quick aside, was really like nice to kind of find out more about. Obviously, we're getting now to the era of things that I lived through. I think most of us in this lived through, and kind of hearing details of that is always pleasant. He signed off the day he was asked by claiming that the Reclaim the Streets as a name of the group was in fact named after the Russian revolutionary adage, to seize power, first you must reclaim the streets. Now, I have checked with historians of the Russian Revolution and people involved in Reclaim the Streets. Nobody has ever heard this before. So either Jim Boyling has some special little insight into the Russian Revolution and some adage that nobody else knows, or he's talking absolute bullshit.
He's talking absolute bullshit.
He's talking absolute bullshit.
Talking absolute bullshit.
And I checked with people that were around when Reclaim the Streets first started as well, and there's no way.
No at all.
And I checked my friends who were involved in the Russian Revolution, and they said it was...
I don't know, actually. I was going to say, so like people were saying that, like, there was no. I said, did it come from like the conflict lyric? Because I mean, you know, fans of anarcho-punk might know that the refrain from Increase the Ungovernable Force album is Reclaim the Streets, Reclaim the Towns, Reclaim the Nation. Came out in 1984. I always assumed that the anarchist sort of reference was the reason for it being the name of the group. Apparently they never heard of that, so I mean, whether somebody did take it from that or not, that wasn't common knowledge.
The people that started the Reclaim the Street Action Network were not conflict fans. I can say that with confidence.
Outrageous. How could anybody not be a conflict fan? It has been pointed out to us that the phrase did appear on one flyer once.
That's not true. That's not true. On the Camden Street Party flyer, there is a phrase that appears at the top, but it's not the phrase that Boyling suggested, which is, in order to take power, you have to first reclaim the streets. It's
control the city.
Yeah, and but I mean, it's just not. It's a similar phrase, and it may be where he's getting that idea from. And I don't believe it comes from the Russian Revolution either. I mean, I mean, this linking it to the Russian Revolution is interesting because, I mean, throughout tranches 1 and 2, we heard a lot about this idea of subversion. And, you know, you have to remember that the STS and a lot of the work that Special Branch was doing is coming out of the Cold War and the capitalist obsession with making sure that Britain doesn't become a communist country. And so, you know, whilst it just sounds ridiculous to most of us, actually there is a significance to trying to link Reclaim the Streets to Russian revolutionary ideas, because that is one of the things that could or was considered to potentially legitimize the work that the SDS were doing. Come the late 1990s, you know, the Cold War has ended, and that remit to spy on potential subversives is actually more or less gone.
Yeah. And Boyling actually said something about that shortly after this. He said the SDS didn't care if a group was subversive or not. They were interested in public order, and at the time, RTS was considered the #1 public order priority for Special Branch. And I think they were basically just embarrassed that we'd had these street parties that involved thousands of people, and the police were taken totally by surprise.
I mean, I think in that
we had a tank in Islington one, and they really didn't like that either. But it was just a sound system in a big vehicle. It wasn't, a militarized tank with guns or anything.
I mean, I think that is, when you look back to the Grosvenor Square incident that led to the SDS being set up in 1968, it was that experience of something happening on a demonstration that they had been completely unprepared for. And I think that to an extent they were unprepared for Reclaim the Streets and the tactics and the creativity and the energy that those parties had. And I can see that, that from the perspective of a unit that is set up for political and social control, that sense of, oh God, something's happening and we're not in on it, probably did make it a priority. But it does say a lot, I think, about their priorities, that they were supposedly investigating serious crime and they decided that traffic obstruction was a greater priority for them.
Yeah, I mean, this pivoted straight into looking at Boyling's reports about the Never Mind the Ballots action of April 97. The report claims that Reclaim the Streets were not actually interested in social justice. They just wanted to take on the police. To which Boyling says, yes, absolutely, that was the case. So this was quite a big action for the time. There's a lot of parts for it. There's a video sort of explaining the involvement of what happened.
That came out that I was particularly interested in was the whole much social justice, public order stuff.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, there's a meeting with the Special Branch Environment Desk person and your two sergeants and TN19 on the 13th of March. Most of the meeting taken up with discussion about the forthcoming RTS extravaganza involving the DOE building, scheduled for the 12th of April. HN14 discussed the RTS plan frankly and in detail, even showing plans of the building which had been obtained by RTS activists. This is the product of you being, by this stage, a member of the core organising group.
Yes, they planned to, or we planned, because I was one of the organisers, to take control of the vacant Department of the Environment building by taking the gates off with a angle grinder and occupying the building and then holding it in the run-up to the general election.
And he kept using we and us, and that was really disturbing, because he's a core organizer, so he's using we when talking about Reclaim the Streets instead of they. I mean, it's like fucked up.
TN19 agreed wholeheartedly that no action should be taken on the basis of HN14's information and that uniform need not be told at this stage.
One of the issues around organising any action is that the plan can be very fluid up until the last moment, and reporting can appear inaccurate by virtue of being given too early.
He kept going on, the plans change, it's in flux. Direct action is always in flux. And maybe we didn't want to tell uniform because the plans would change. I mean, I imagine, is that another thing around CO11 and Special Branch?
I mean, there's certainly some sort of level of contempt towards uniform in general from Special Branch. The idea that you wouldn't want to bother their little heads about anything complicated because we don't want to have to tell them twice, because if you tell them twice, they'll get confused and they might think it's the original set of information when in fact it's the secondary set.
Yeah.
Did the decision to withhold information change?
Yes, because they were certainly they were fully aware, because I was told on the phone that the decision that the activists would not be allowed to occupy the Department of the Environment building had been made by the Home Secretary.
So what it turns out, he says, at one point in March Social Justice, he gets a phone call from SDS saying that the Home Secretary has decided and it's not okay for an anarchist group to occupy, even though it's an empty government building, in the lead up to general election in Westminster.
I think it might have been Keith Edmondson. I think it was a phone call when I was driving my van, I remember pulling over to take the call and thinking, well, that's going to be really difficult then. But I was told that no, the Home Secretary has decided that the negative publicity in the run-up to an election caused by anarchists seizing a government building next to Parliament Square would be too damaging and it's not to go ahead. I think our policing line was that it's a vacant building, so we were less concerned.
And presumably you're not able to shed any light on any details of when the Home Secretary took that decision, or are you?
It was very late. I remember it was very late because it was too late for me to try to see if there was any chance of tweaking the plan.
Was that something that was suggested to you?
Just generally, if it would serve our interests, all we want to do is be able to give a really full briefing on what the organisers' intentions are so that the event can be policed effectively. And then I guess from the special branch point of view, it shows that we've got good coverage. If the activists come up with a plan that we can tweak towards something that's acceptable, everyone's a winner from our point of view. The disaster scenario for us is where the activists have one plan and it's blocked, because then we've got no idea what they're going to do, and then you do get running battles and you don't know what's going to happen then. So from our point of view, we would have been quite happy to give them the empty building, and it was obviously, it's not helpful to us to be told that no, that's not going to happen.
So he says that's what stopped us. That's what made the decision. But it doesn't talk about that whole discussion, which was really interesting in the evidence, which is all about, should we let them do it or should we not let them do it? And it's saying inevitably, if we don't let them do it, there will be disorder.
And it seems on at least one occasion, he's feeding all this intelligence and it's ignored.
When he was asked about the disorder that happened in Trafalgar Square as a result of the occupation not taking place, he very quickly started talking about what was in the tabloid newspapers the next day. And I had to be reminded by Barr that he was being asked questions as an eyewitness, not for someone who read the tabloids the next day. And then he just was desperately kind of thrashing around, trying to think of things that were disorderous that he witnessed himself. And he didn't have a great deal.
No. And then he said, often these events are badly policed.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was. We pivoted, as Barr likes to do. We pivoted from the. Actually, one of the things which did come out, which didn't get picked up there, was the way in which, something which we explored a bit more later, that CO11 did not trust the intelligence that was coming from SO12, from the SDS, so much so that they felt the need to look into setting up their own unit. We saw like a letter from the commander of CO11 to SO12, thanking them for information. But Boyling said that they never wanted the uniformed police to ever know who the undercover officer was, because they didn't trust them not to reveal that undercover officer, which is quite wild. We just had a question, which I think is really pertinent, actually, from Maddox Roberts, one of the filmmakers who made the Police Spies Who Ruined Our Lives. How common are instances of the Home Secretary being involved in real time like this? Certainly, I think it's the first example that I think we've been made aware of during the inquiry of a real-time interjection by a Home Secretary. But I mean, we believe them to be a bit more common. But certainly this is an incredibly significant one, and the first one I've come across. Is anybody else got any examples?
Well, they don't normally like to admit being involved in making decisions about policing.
I mean, I think it's
put this in their statement if they ever produce one for the inquiry.
I think there's it's worth saying that my understanding is that all of the Home Office's own records about their interactions with the SDS have been destroyed. So we're relying on these glimpses that we get. The Home Office have not been called to give evidence yet. And the inquiry doesn't appear to intend to ask the Home Office to give a corporate statement about how involved they were in this stuff. But we do see a number of instances, and there's, this 1997, we're talking, I think, about Michael Howard, having intervened and said this is not to be allowed to go ahead. We later see in Boyling's evidence in 1998 around the Birmingham G8 that he is specifically congratulated by Jack Straw for the work that he's done.
Although he denied that in his testimony.
The Jack Straw congratulated the SDS, and that was passed on to him. He wasn't a personal congratulation, but it's clear that there was intelligence going. We see it later as well with other G8 summits in 2005, which, you know, is one of those events a bit like June the 18th, which all the spy cops who were deployed at the time were involved in. And Mark Kennedy has publicly said that his briefings were going across Tony Blair's desk at that time. I mean, I think on kind of there's a growing significance in this period, and it comes like it's actually written down in a lot of the authorizations later on that a good part of the purpose of this political policing was to avoid embarrassment for Her Majesty's government. And they're protecting events like we'll come to next week, the Defence and Security Equipments International, the DICE arms fair. It's a big international arms fair, takes place in London, and they're policing that because they don't want to damage Britain's reputation in the international arms trade, and they don't want to embarrass the government at these big international events. So they're cracking down on protest for that reason. And so I think there's going to be an increase in that kind of government involvement and briefings going to government to inform what they're saying about stuff.
Some observers have suggested that maybe it would be time for the inquiry to ask questions of some of those people who served as Home Office ministers. So Mark Howard is still alive. He sits in the House of Lords. He's compos mentis. He could be sent a civilian witness statement request. Jack Straw, similarly, still alive, could be asked questions. If this inquiry was really, keen to get to the truth, they could find out a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say, sorry, what we see in this particular case appears to be SDS reporting getting past jumping the uniformed, the normal Met police straight up to a higher level, skipping the police at all. And yet Jim Boyling will say, all we want to do is create the best possible, fullest briefing so that, they can be effective policing. Almost in the same breath as having said, we didn't tell the police.
There was another really interesting thing that he said there that I think we need to be aware of when we're listening to these officers, is the suggestion that had he had time, he would have tweaked the plan. And this is where you see that these undercover officers, they're going into political groups and they're not just observing and reporting back on what people are doing. They are manipulating, and that idea that he would have, in the police's interest, in special branches' interest, he would have gone in and he would have tweaked the plan and made sure that there was a suitable plan B that would have come out with, everyone's a winner and everyone's managed to achieve what they wanted to achieve. That is very deep state political interference in people's rights to organise and people's rights to protest, where you've essentially got a police officer saying, had I had time, I would have gone back into the meetings and I would have organised a new plan for people to protest that would have suited everybody's interests. I mean, that, and he said it, as though it were a perfectly normal thing and as though it were a perfectly reasonable thing to have done. And I think we need to be really aware of that's what they were doing.
Just a quick thanks to Maddock for leaving us a comment. Please, if anybody's got any questions like Maddock did, please comment. We will read them out. We will address them. There's 142 people watching right now. 18 have liked. That's just over 10%. Made a massive impact. If you could like and share this broadcast, it would really help loads. Sorry, it's so cringe to ask. But I think one of the other things to really take out of this stuff is that CO11 so didn't trust the intelligence they were getting from the SDS. They went on to start their own unit, the Forward Intelligence Teams, which I have to be honest, as an activist, when we found out about the existence of spy cops, I always assumed that all these sections of the police were working together. As it turns out, they had nothing but contempt for each other. They were engaged in a form of turf war inside the police. Insane when you consider that by this point, in fact, the only real client of SDS intelligence is the public order branch. Public order branch don't trust them enough that they set their own unit to go and harass protesters. I mean, if anybody remembers the times the Forward Intelligence Teams and just being stalked, essentially, it was incredibly significant deployments, really, really stressful things to deal with. Personally, I had a lot of problems with Forward Intelligence Teams, but that was simply because the SDS were not trusted by other forms of the police, which I find quite wild. So Barr pivoted this talk of the March for Social Justice into something which happened that very same day, the start of Boyling's deceptive sexual relationship with Monica. We went through, as is often the case, going through the details of how they met, how they kissed, how they went back to his flat, the beginning of the sexual situation. He said he claimed that young men don't run away from nice women kissing them. It was all very gross. He started talking some bullshit about how he invested too much of himself in his role as an undercover officer. He also, at the same time, it was pointed out to him that he was going to SDS meetings at least twice a week. He said, oh, no, because it was a time of a lot of bid actions, he was going to SDS meetings every single day. So the idea that he'd lost himself in his undercover identity is somewhat unconvincing when you consider that particular fact. He said that he didn't think about deceiving Monica because his whole life was a deceit. He said that his hypothetical girlfriend in Denmark was no longer plausible. He said that when attractive women ask to come home with young men don't make excuses. It was put to him by Barr that he was offered sex and he was going to take it. He denied this, but then had to admit it was, yes, for sex and for cover. He was very he didn't know what he claimed he didn't know what was crossing his mind at the time. He claimed he tried to downplay the length of the relationship with Monica. He fumbled the question about his answer about having a condom ready. It was put to him that Monica would not have consented to sex with him if she had known he was an undercover officer. This was particularly gross. He denied this. He said she might have. He was asked if he gave any thought to consent at any time. He said he couldn't remember. He's tried to argue with Barr about this idea that she wouldn't have had sex with him. He started talking about some activists who'd been in the army who people found attractive, as if somehow this was an equivalence. Thankfully, for everybody's stomachs, he stopped himself and said simply, no, if she says that, I won't dispute. For me, that just looked like coaching. The way that he instinctively had a whole fucking spiel he wanted to come out with, and then in his brain something went, no, remember we were told, don't go down that particular road. You'll look disgusting and a fucking pervert rapist. Say, I don't dispute what she says, which is a line we've heard from so many undercover officers when it comes to allegations that are put to them by women they deceived into sex. The final line of the day from David Barr was, what would it have taken to stop you? To which Boyling squirmed uncontrollably. And then Barr was like, would a stronger management line have helped? To which he went, I think so. And that was the end of the hearing for the day. I think there's a video about him being deceptive. I think, is this from the same bit, Ben?
I can't remember. I mean,
so there's just entering into a sexual relationship with somebody is a big deal, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Did you, on this occasion, with Ruth,
give
any thought to the fact that you were deceiving her actively as to your real identity?
No.
Did you give any thought to the fact that you were depriving her of the opportunity to make an informed decision as to whether to consent to sex?
No.
You should have done, shouldn't you?
Well, given that I'm sat here, that would have been a better idea, but I don't see how that could have come about.
Could have come about by giving consideration to her as a woman and a human being, couldn't it?
I think I gave great consideration to her in that way.
How can you say that when you deprived her of informed consent?
I don't think I have.
If it was said that your answers display a complete disregard for her as a woman, what would you say?
I have the highest regard for her. The last thing I would have wanted would have to have been disrespectful to her. The last thing I would have wanted to do would have been to have been disrespectful to her.
But that is precisely what you were by depriving her of informed consent, isn't it?
To an extent, but I think that was a product of the circumstances.
God, he's fucking horrible. That was in reference to Ruth, who was the second woman he deceived. This was not. It was a different point in proceedings, but I mean, I think it illustrates in the same way, really, how particularly gross he is when talking about this.
I mean, the man absolutely believes that he did nothing wrong, and you saw that. I mean, there was a bit in which I don't know if I can talk about.
Yeah, so I mean, there is a lot of bits that, yeah.
What we can talk about is what he said that day about Monica. He kept repeating this thing about, you know, the majority of the spy cops who infiltrated these lifestyle movements had sexual relationships. And then he went on to say some nonsense claim about, it was 90% lifestyle and 10% politics. And then repeated this thing, which I'm sure he said several times, I had to, you know, there's no way a single man would ever have been accepted in these groups. It's like, well, actually, looking around, you know, who was actually in RTS meetings and in the RTS group, there were plenty of single people. And there's a load of people now that have said, you know, do I need to write a petition or come forward to the inquiry to prove that I was single and never had relationships with activists the entire time I was in this group? Because that's what Jim's relying on here, is saying, oh, I had to do this. It was part of, you know, keeping my cover. And that's what they were all doing. And we've heard that before from other spy cops.
So I've just checked, and the thing that I wanted to say is not covered by the restriction order, which is the later on, after he's been taken through all of the awful, deceitful, abusive things that he did in the sexual relationships that he deceived women into. He's asked whether he would adhere to the apology that the Metropolitan Police have issued to those. And his reaction was fury.
Should we just show that? Should we just show that? This was the very end. This was the very end of. So we're skipping forward here to the Wednesday afternoon. But this is when it was put to him about the apology by the Met Police.
There were any great sexist attitudes on the SDS. I've been recruited at the same time as a female officer, as well as Mark. We worked together. I don't think there was any sort of disrespect towards women.
And you maintain that view, notwithstanding everything we now know about what was happening in the
Yes.
I'm going to read to you the Metropolitan Police Service's apology produced to this inquiry at the start of Tranche 2. And the question, once I've read it, is whether you align yourself with that apology now. These relationships, and it's referring to the sexual relationships, were a gross violation of these individuals' privacy and human rights. They were abusive, deceitful, manipulative, and wrong. The MPS apologises again, unreservedly, to the individuals whose lives have been and continue to be affected. Further, as the MPS said in its preliminary closing remarks at the conclusion to T2, sexual relationships and the poor management that facilitated them were unacceptable by the standards of any time and amounted to serious failings.
What is the question?
Do you align yourself with that apology now?
No, I don't. I think that's a very self-serving and slightly cowardly response by the Met in order to avoid responsibility for.
And yes, and then it was cut, but not because of what he said.
But because whenever they cut
there
it, they tend to cut it because something was said 10 minutes later. I think you are allowed to tell us what was said immediately after that, because I was dead curious and was left hanging, listening to nothing. Did Boyling say anything else after that bit about cowardly?
He did, and it's not recovered by the restriction order.
I did tweet about it, but it's 2 days ahead in my notes. So if I went to look for it now, I'd lose everything else I want to say in order.
We'll come back to it.
So we're now on the Tuesday morning. We had half a days of hearings that we're allowed to report about. It started off with Barr asking Boyling about the relationship with Monica. It gets more gross, I'm afraid. He downplays quite heavily. He tries to pretend it was a very short relationship. She's very clear that it was at least 6 months. He claims, we kind of slept together 10 times at most. He said that she was having sex with 2 other men, something that she denies. He keeps referring to this repeatedly, that she was a free spirit, that it's just that he liked her. He claimed that sexual gratification probably wouldn't be a primary motivating force. And also admitted it wouldn't have done any harm to his cover to deceive Monica into the sexual relationship. He claimed there was only one occasion where Monica formed the basis for his reporting, something which is at odds with the evidence that we've seen. He said it wasn't an intense relationship for him, and it wasn't for her either. When he's told that she says it was, he said, well, it's the first that he's heard of it. He didn't listen to what Monica said when she gave evidence recently, and it didn't appear like he listened to her when they were in a relationship either. Some of the things that she felt were particularly painful about the relationship, particularly hurtful things that he did, were put to him. He laughed at them, said no, he doesn't remember it. He denied mocking her whilst mocking her. It was really gross. It was really unpleasant. The whole stuff. He uttered the classic line, "I never thought I would be in this position, so I can't answer." When it came to talking about his activity, he kept naming people during this period. A lot of this stuff wasn't broadcast because he kept naming people who were not in the public domain. These were people who. He claimed Monica was sleeping with. He kept naming them. He was told not to. He kept doing it. It kind of felt like he was making sure that this piece of the broadcast would not be broadcast. The piece of evidence wouldn't be broadcast. He said he didn't tell his managers about it because if he did, they'd have to have done something. Barr pointed out it was because it was wrong. Boyling then got an argument with Barr about whether it was morally wrong. He says it was wrong because he's now found out that it caused her distress. It was pointed out to him that it was morally wrong because he was deceiving to us who he was. He said, well, he was deceiving everyone. So he rejects the idea that it was morally wrong and blames her for the relationship. He was very clear that it wasn't morally wrong. He said it's for others to decide if it broke the professional code. But as Barr pointed out, that was already been decided, to which Boyling had another tantrum and said, without me being present, because yes, as most of you may know, Jim Boyling decided not to turn up to his own disciplinary, and he was, in fact, sacked from the police. He claimed he's not the bad guy, and he's been treated as a defendant, and really started to sulk. He denied having sex with Monica again after the relationship ended. He was very angry about this. He suggested it would be unthinkable. This was the beginning of him having one of his many tantrums that he would throughout the day. He said that his reporting on Monica, he was careful not to have any negative consequences for her, and then went, but you'll probably show me where I haven't, like some sort of petulant child.
I think it's worth, in context here, it's worth mentioning that at the very end, when Mitting says goodbye, he informed everybody that Boyling did not appear voluntarily to give evidence. He was compelled. And I think these tantrums and him, he makes various comments about feeling like a defendant and he's here under duress. He does not want to be giving this evidence. And so these kind of, and he evidently, as you said before, has been coached. And there is this kind of flickering personality almost, where you go between the petulance and the tantrums and the contempt and the attempts to look like he's being thoughtful and being helpful. And I really did get a sense of this kind of flickering personality where he's trying to keep to his training, but it slips a lot.
Before you continue there, Tom, that raises that part about not reporting anything that would get her in trouble. He made another claim about how.
Can you say this?
I believe I can say this.
So I've got a bunch of notes about this because he went straight onto it, so I can tell you exactly what he said.
Yeah.
He said that you try to be fair when reporting on people you are having sex with. He claimed that the SDS withheld intelligence because they felt that the consequences would be unnecessarily severe on certain individuals. So he admitted that they didn't give intelligence to other forces who were trying to build cases on activists. He said that at first he says that he would have withheld the information from his managers. Then he contradicted himself and said no, he would discuss it with their managers and they would decide together not to share the intelligence any further. He said he was just very careful with his reporting. I mean, this seems incredibly serious to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's it's kind of obvious to us from everything that we've been reading and everything we've been seeing, but this is the first time that it's ever really been openly admitted, I think, that there was absolutely no pretense at impartiality or objective reporting of intelligence by the SDS. This was quite clearly ideological reporting, and he specifically says at some point that his managers had ideological beliefs that would affect whether or not reporting on a particular campaign, like how they felt about a campaign.
I think the anti-genetics campaign was one where he expressed that they had sympathy.
They had sympathy with the anti-genetics campaign, so they wouldn't record that reporting or they wouldn't pass it on. I mean, it's not just political policing. It's like deeply biased political policing, even within the logic of like the deeply biased political policing that was the entire reason for the unit existing. This kind of personal preferences deciding whether or not intelligence would or would not get passed on. Personal political beliefs being the deciding factor on how intelligence would be dealt with. I think that was very significant.
We just had another question. Was him being compelled connected with his sacking? Like if he was still a cop, might he have got away with not showing up? I'm not sure. I mean, essentially, the inquiry, like kind of compelling officers to appear, is something that's always in their remit. You get the impression that as a number of former undercover officers, are very willing to turn up, such as their ego. Others have managed to get out of it. I don't know when where Mitting has explicitly pointed out that an officer had to be compelled to give evidence before. Certainly, I can imagine them behaving very differently towards him because he has been sacked from the force.
I mean, there is a thing that we notice at the end of a lot of these days of evidence, which is that some witnesses Mitting thanks at the end of the day, and other witnesses he quite pointedly does not. And I believe that when Mitting does not thank a witness, it is because he's had to compel them to be there and feels no need to be grateful for their appearance. I think he told us specifically at the end of Boyling's evidence, because he did actually say some things about how he accepted that it may have been difficult to give some of the evidence, even though you've been compelled to be here. So it was his kind of, I'm not thanking you, but kind of comment that made it clear that in this case that he definitely had been compelled. It's something that we don't necessarily know. But I think how Mitting treats the witness at the end does give you an idea.
I mean, there's an undertaking not to compel the civilian witnesses. There's definitely not an undertaking for the police witnesses. And for all we know, I mean, what does it actually mean to be compelled? They have to show, unless they are outside the jurisdiction. So they can move to Scotland or they can move to Spain for a really long time because the inquiry is not short. Or effectively, they're all compelled to show. Or they can be ill, they can die, or they can claim mental illness, which of course is what we've seen from some of the officers.
And if you were still a cop or some kind of senior, especially a senior cop or some sort of similar associated profession, it'd be a lot easier to get more anonymity and have your name withheld, or to not have your face shown, or all those other sort of special measures. But obviously Jim Boyling is in a sort of slightly different situation because we've known his real name for a really long time, we've known his cover name for a really long time, and there was no way he could get anonymity.
Yeah, I mean, just to go back to the Tuesday morning, Boyling was in full tantrum mode by this point. So I'm getting some feedback from somewhere. I think it's probably someone who's not using headphones. I'm just getting a massive echo. Maybe if you could just turn the volume down because it's just feeding back into your microphone. So he leaned very heavily on his lack of memory, all the stuff to do with Monica, much more so than he had on the previous day. And he got to the point where, when it was pointed out he was making a snide comment about Monica, he claimed not to know what snide meant, which was hilarious. He said that he'd made all the comments he needed to make, and he wouldn't be saying anything more about it. He repeated he had a high opinion of Monica, and really got very angry with David Barr about the line of questionings. He was asked about Monica's feelings on the discovery that he was an undercover officer in 2011. He claims that he didn't see any possibility of that arising, so he didn't think about it. He said there was only ever a slim risk of him being exposed, so he didn't have to think about Monica's feelings. This is something that's kind of happened a few times with the undercover officers. So yeah, but knowing what you know, how do you feel about it? And they just go, well, I didn't know. I didn't think it would ever happen. Which is, obviously obfuscating. He said it was very clear that his manager was aware that he was in a relationship. He wasn't making a secret of it. He would talk to fellow officers about it. When he was pushed on this, he declined to name people. He said that he told HN1, a cover name Matt Rayner, which was something we already knew. He says he sought advice about him on many things, but not about the relationship with Monica, though it did come up. He really desperately tried not to name any undercover officers. Then when he was pushed, he says that he can name Peter Francis as one officer that he told. Obviously, he can throw the undercover officer who went whistleblower under the bus. And then he says that there was only some, he doesn't name any others, but were in the same field. He said none of them reacted to the fact he was having a sexual relationship with an activist. He says about half of them were having sexual relationships with activists. When it was put to him about the fact that there was plenty of people in RTS having sexual relationships, so this idea that you had to be in a sexual relationship, as Carolyn was talking about earlier, was a farce. He said, they'd all been in relationships with each other at some point. Just ridiculous. There's a clip about him telling his managers about this. I think this is the right one.
Well, they'd lived in the same squats.
Is it your evidence that you didn't tell your managers about it?
Yeah, I didn't tell my managers about it.
Was that because you knew it was wrong?
No, it was because I knew they wouldn't want to. They wouldn't want me to bring it to their attention.
Because it was wrong, and then they'd have to deal with it or cover it up.
Well, the management could know about something without me actually bringing it to their attention. If I brought it to their attention formally and putting them in a position where they would then have to take a position, and I was aware that that wasn't something that would be applauded.
And that's because the right answer in taking a position is it was wrong, wasn't it?
Do you mean morally wrong or in contravention of the guidelines I've been given?
Is your view that it was wrong in any way?
Yes.
In what ways?
Well, because she's clearly... I'm not going to question anything that Monica's saying in her account now, and I think she's saying that it caused her distress. I would not have wished to cause her any distress.
It was morally wrong because you were deceiving her as to who you really were.
Well, I'm deceiving everybody as to who I really am.
That's not an answer to the question.
I think it is.
Gross. Really fucking gross. Yeah, but that was from slightly earlier, but yeah, it makes the same point. Before we then get into his questions on Ruth, there was really interesting ones. We've shown a report of his from May 97 about an AGM of Shell. Boyling reported on it, but he claim he didn't remember it. He didn't know if Shell were warned in advance or not. He was asked about the relationship the SDS had with private companies, and he said that that though he wouldn't have had those conversations himself, he was aware that private companies had and their own intelligence sources within groups, and that that intelligence was then passed on to the SDS so they could mark the homework of the private investigators that private companies were deploying. This was quite a big revelation in itself. We've long suspected that there was a two-way street of information between private companies and the SDS. He claims he admits to one way of that street. Certainly, I think we put it with things we heard from the likes of Commander Gunn during the last phase. I think this is confirmation that very much was a two-way street. And one of the part of that was marking the homework of private investigators that the SDS was doing. I think this is really significant. Kate, you're on mute.
I think this is massive. He appeared to believe, as he was saying this, that he was telling the inquiry that no, of course, we wouldn't be passing intelligence on to private companies. This was essentially his way of denying, as other officers have done, that this was going on. But in doing that, he kind of says, they would give us intelligence and we would mark. When he said marking their homework, what he meant was reading their intelligence and telling them whether it was right or not, which is passing information to them. And yeah, this is something that so many officers have tried to avoid or deny. And it's he was asked which companies, and I think at the point where he was asked which companies, he realized that he hadn't actually denied that they were passing information to companies, and he started to kind of close up around the topic. He admitted that they did do this with Shell, and then he kind of made vague reference to financial companies in the City of London, I can't remember if he was specifically asked about McDonald's, but obviously this is one of the really big questions that lots of officers have been asked. And we know, because of evidence that came out in the McLibel trial, that there was contact between the police and the private spies and McDonald's as a company. But we haven't had any officer who has been willing to admit to that or to provide any information about how that worked or who was responsible. And I think Boyling's answers on this was one of the kind of clearest and most useful nuggets of information that we've got so far, really, about that crossover between police spying and private companies and private corporate interests.
Hopefully,
there's a lot more to come on this.
Yeah, hopefully in the managers section in the summer, we'll be really getting into this.
He climbed up so fast from giving any details, it did make the whole story seem a bit incredible. And I think he was asked about McDonald's a little bit later on in the day, and he actually said, well, he'd heard about the private spies in London Greenpeace meetings from reading about it in Private Eye. He didn't even admit hearing about that from the SDS colleagues or anything, which is a bit bizarre.
Well, if they got it from Private Eye, it would explain why it was such a joke for them.
Well, I find it incredible that, Lambert wouldn't have mentioned it at some point. They were such good mates,
Just a comment from Emma Wallace, who asked the previous question. Just thanking us for the question and have the whole anonymity and getting away with not showing up at the inquiry by undercover officers doing their head in. Yeah, I think we all feel the same. Thanks for the comment. Please, if anybody else got any questions or comments, please add them. There's 178 people watching, 21 have liked. Please like, share. I know it's cringe me asking, but it makes a big difference. Please could share it, like it, tell your friends, and so on. So now we get into the deception of Ruth, the second woman who Jim Boyling deceived into a sexual relationship. She'd been involved in activism since she was a child. He claimed that he got into a relationship with her because he liked her. But as she was so connected with Ukrainian streets, it didn't do his deployment any harm. He said he probably should have thought about the fact he was an undercover officer before embarking on a relationship with Ruth, but he was living in his persona full-time, never mind the fact he was having daily meetings with his managers, and that people need to be more understanding of that, which, yeah, I mean, I think this is the thing. Men who deceive women into sex need to be understood more. That's clearly what the problem is. He said his managers, if he'd have had any moral qualms to go take to his managers, they would have regarded it as absurd. He kind of suggested that it was some sort of sexual advance that he was unable to resist. He says he told HN 104 about this sexual advance, and he was told to use his initiative. He talked about there being high maintenance and low maintenance undercover officers, and that he didn't want to be a high maintenance one. He was a low maintenance officer, so he didn't ask for too much help or advice from his managers.
I mean, the number in that little bit of extract of you reading from your notes, the number of red flags around cultures of toxic masculinity in the Metropolitan Police. It's just like ping, ping. The idea, I mean, first of all, we have the way that Boyling blames the women. We've heard him blaming his wife. We've heard him blaming Monica. We've heard him blaming Ruth. And you know, we've heard all sorts of stuff that I'm not going to mention. But this idea that, you know, he needs to be better understood, and somehow that this is a problem, A, created by the women, and B, something that, you know, because of his ideas of what how a young man ought to behave, means that he has no choice in how he responds to this. And this idea that, you know, he couldn't take any of these problems to his managers because that would make them essentially look weak. This idea of high maintenance and low maintenance officers. I mean, it's all just so messed up. And I think a really key thing is, you know, we hear these attitudes expressed over and over again by these officers, and they're expressed unquestioningly. You know, there is no awareness at all of just how, you know, how many alarm bells are going off to the people listening. I mean, I genuinely think that he feels that he ought to be a sympathetic character in this.
Very much. I mean, he actually complains that Ruth didn't discuss the relationship with him and disguised her feelings for her. He says that the relationship worked for him at the time. In fact, it worked for both of us. But when it became too emotionally intense for her, he tried to stop it. He said the relationship with Ruth was public. He met her brother, her mother, and their friends. He denied ever going on holiday with her, and then said that, oh yes, they would go to actions together on the way back, maybe stop off for a few days of social time together. But that's not a holiday, apparently, according to Boyling. He was asked about whether there was any feelings of love within the relationship. He denied there was any depth of feeling, but then he claimed it was a philosophical question, and he wasn't there for that. He claimed that Ruth didn't give him any private information about her activist friends. He claimed not to remember anything she told him about that. And he only once used his connection with her to benefit his reporting. Can
I just go back to that thing about HN 104? Just in case anyone gets confused. It was HN 104 is another of the spy cops, not one of the managers. That's Carl O'Neary, as he was known at the time. It was him. He was told by the managers to use this initiative, but at the same time, Boyling's claiming that the other spy cops who had relationships were treated more sympathetically than he was. But it wasn't Carl O'Neary that told him to use this initiative. Just so we're clear.
Oh right,
because we're going to hear Carlo soon.
I mean, again, the relationship with Ruth ended. I mean, he seems quite angry about this. He disputed her version of events and then says, "Oh, I don't dispute them, though." He talked about the fact that she had a fling with another activist, which he seems personally offended by. And then it was pointed out to him that she feels repulsed by him now. He seemed really angry about that. And there's a little clip.
When she found out that you were an undercover police officer in January 2011, her evidence is that she was hurt and angry. And more recently, she's felt repulsed. Those feelings are wholly unsurprising in the circumstances, aren't they? Mr. Boyling, do you accept in any way your conduct was repulsive?
No, I don't think so.
Because you deceived her, didn't you?
Yes, as I deceived everybody.
You betrayed her trust. Is that a yes?
I didn't realise that was a question, sorry.
You betrayed her trust?
Question mark.
Yes.
I guess so, within the context of the situation within which I found myself.
Do you not accept even now that an undercover police officer entering into a sexual relationship with somebody doesn't manipulate their emotions?
No, it does manipulate their emotions, but I think being an undercover police officer manipulates people in a lot of different ways.
And you manipulated her sexually?
No, I don't think I manipulated her sexually.
It's an extension of the same thing, isn't it? If you are not who you say you are, and you are not what you say you are, and you are having sex with her, you are manipulating her sexually.
I don't feel that's the case.
God, he's horrible, isn't he? He's so fucking horrible.
Unrepentant. Oh my God. I was... Anyway.
Yeah, really gross. Really incredibly gross. I mean, just a taste, really, of his attitude and the way he talked about the women he deceived sexually. Just incredibly gross. Incredibly gross. Yeah, and as we've just had a comment from the Free the MBR Beagles, and this man claims they were never disrespectful to women. I mean, this was such a hallmark of his evidence. You know, I mean, with Monica, he claimed that he wasn't mocking of her whilst mocking her. He claims they weren't disrespectful of women whilst being incredibly disrespectful to women. This just seems to be kind of, par for the course. Just incredibly gross. After we got through the Ruth questioning, there was a lot of questions about the June the 18th, 1999, the Carnival Against Capitalism. It was a very significant event in activist terms, certainly a very significant event for me personally. I had a big effect on my political organising. Jim Boyling was a key organiser. He describes himself as a key organiser. He was, as we heard from GRD and the previous week, he was the person who coordinated the crashing of cars, the simulated crashing of cars at either ends of the block road in order to have the street party. He says that that his managers were fully aware of his role. He didn't seek permission to obstruct the highway. So it was such a minor issue, obstructing the highway, that it wasn't even considered by the SDS at any point. We were shown some reports in the lead up. He claims that on top of the very detailed reporting that does exist, he claims there's a great deal more intelligence about the event that he provided that was not being shown, doesn't appear to have been presented. He talked about the fact that he normally would just give oral briefings to his handler, but for June the 18th, he wrote it down because there was so much detail and it was so important that he had to make sure that it was all properly reported. He spent £13,000 as treasurer of Reclaim the Streets as part of the planning for J18. He bought the cars and bought and hired all the other equipment. He said he became the treasurer because he worked by consensus for spending the money, as everybody in the group had to. He talked about one of RTS being wealthy and donated, and the fact that other money had been raised from the likes of Chumbawamba. He talked about the consensus decision-making model, which, I mean, I think is probably old news for a lot of us, but, kind of went through the whole thing. He said he was always looking for ways for activists to be given an opportunity to snatch a draw. I mean, this was part of this whole thing about like claiming that the SDS weren't in the business of destroying Reclaim the Streets. That in fact they wanted them to be able to like carry on what they were doing, but as long as they had coverage, as long as there was full coverage of it, then as far as the SDS were concerned, then these groups were going to be allowed to flourish. I mean,
I find it very amusing that he uses that term in the context of June the 18th, because anybody who was at June the 18th definitely came away feeling, well, we snatched a draw there, didn't we? You know, I mean, June the 18th was a massive win in the sense that it completely changed the political dialogue of the time. Anti-capitalism became something that wasn't an echo to the Cold War and communism. Like it was when anti-capitalism as a political position that wasn't about communism, it was about the wrongs of what was happening, became part of the kind of popular political discourse, and the whole anti-globalization. I mean, I could go on for hours about the significance of Reclaim the Streets. And I think one of the things that you really need to think about in terms of Boyling's role in Reclaim the Streets is that after the event, the Home Secretary of the time went into Parliament and said, you know, how was this allowed to happen? This was allowed to happen because the organisers of this event do not talk to the police. We had no idea what was going to happen. There was no way of knowing what they were going to do. And, you know, that is absolute nonsense. The organisers of this event included the police. Jim Boyling was inside organising this event. The police knew exactly what was going to happen. There are written reports from weeks before the event that describe what happened on the day. This is what's going to happen. This is where it's going to go. This is how people are going to be moved there. They knew everything. And so the key point is that we come back to this idea of contempt for uniform, and the SDS knew what was going to happen, but it appears that they chose not to tell the City of London Police, who were responsible for policing on the day. And I think there needs to be a lot more questions asked about that and about why that happened. And you were about to play a clip, so I'll let you get on with that. But I did this JA thing.
I think we should talk a bit more about that fact that there was the withholding of the intelligence from the Met Police to the City of London Police. There's a second example of this turf war that's existing within policing. That essentially, you know, the Met Police were more concerned with getting primacy of public order in the City of London than it was about preventing any particular disorder on the day. Now, this was explored further later on, but like essentially the upshot appears to be that they claim that the City of London turned down the intelligence, but it seems highly unlikely that. It seems much more likely that the Met were withholding evidence. They were surrounding the city with riot police ready to go in. There was 2 gold commands on the day, so that one from the city, one from the Met Police. I'm just people don't really understand that. I mean, the Metropolitan Police are the whole of London, yet the city, the financial district in the centre, has its own separate police force, and this is considered an anachronism in the eyes of the Met, and a belief that maybe they shouldn't really be having any sort of serious responsibilities of any sort, so that they and there's the desire to usurp the role that they ostensibly take in the city. I think this is again very significant because it shows that like there is nothing about preventing public disorder in terms of the SDS role on the day of June the 18th. Supposedly, primary indication.
I think that's a really, really key point because I mean, you know, that we've had this point from the Metropolitan Police and from the SDS about the justification for what they were doing, and we keep hearing this issue of public order, and so you know we've looked at some of the major public order events that have happened over the course of the years that the SDS have been involved. And there are some, like the Brixton riots of 1981, where the SDS admit that their spying and the groups that they were spying on were completely irrelevant. That, you know, this was a spontaneous outburst of popular unrest, and actually, whilst the police tried to blame the Brixton riots on some of the local anarchist groups that the police were spying on, actually, it really didn't have very much to do with them at all. We've seen a lot of discussion around Welling. The evidence that we've seen makes it quite clear that, you know, the intelligence used was essentially used by the police to raise antagonism with the crowd on the day. The same thing is true of the March for Social Justice, where we see Boyling's intelligence saying, we should have let them go ahead and occupy the building, but actually the intelligence was used to create a situation of running battles in the street. We see that over and over again. J18 is one of the very, very few occasions, I think, where we can say that the SDS genuinely did have someone on the inside gathering the intelligence, knowing what was going to happen on an event that I think could predictively have been said to have been a significant public order incident. And nothing was done about it. Nothing was done to prevent that. Use that intelligence in order to prevent any kind of public order incident on the day. In fact, quite the contrary. I mean, it basically, if you didn't stop that, what were you doing? What was the point? And it really raises, I mean, it kind of blows the whole public order claim out of the water. Like, what? Give another example. Give a better example of public order in that time, and of something that you actually did or you actually knew about. That I mean, you know, I when we came into this and I became part of the Reclaim the Streets core participant group, it was like, well, you know, there was significant public order. We are going to have to think about the question of this justification of having to spy on groups that were creating public disorder. But then we saw the evidence, and it was like, well, they could have prevented that public disorder. They knew that. They didn't even take their own advice based on the intelligence that they had.
They didn't even tweak the plans, as far as we can tell, for that day.
No.
They let it all go ahead because it was in the city.
Yeah, I mean, just giving the example of June the 18th, the fact that they knew that the demonstration would be going to the Futures Exchange, they could have protected the Futures Exchange. What kicked off the public disorder, if you don't consider a carnival and a street party and, you know, the things that were planned to be public disorder, what kicked off the public disorder on June the 18th was the provocation of the City of London workers, the traders at the Futures Exchange, standing on the balcony, throwing photocopied £50 notes down over the crowd and shouting, "Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough." And people went through the doors of the Futures Exchange and went up the escalators. And that is what provoked the riot police to then come down and try to clear the area and get people away. And that, the fact that we were going to this Futures Exchange was something that the police knew weeks before the event. And they had police outside the Bank of England protecting the Bank of England. They did not have police outside the Futures Exchange protecting the Futures Exchange, and they allowed that confrontation to go ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, this goes all the way through Jim Boyling's deployment, right from his very first year undercover. He reported on the Watley Quarry action in Somerset in November. It happened, you know, a couple of weeks later. It ended up costing, I think, £250,000, which was quite a lot of money in those days. A lot of people, about 60 people, got arrested for aggravated trespass. He claimed not to have any memory at all of this, but he did admit that the local police in Somerset were caught completely unexpected by this demonstration, even though he knew about it in advance. And therefore, presumably, the Met could have warned him if they'd chosen to. He claims now not to remember this event at all. And, oh, yeah, there was loads of protests like that. No, there was only one protest like that ever at Watley Quarry that caused that sort of damage. And everyone else who was there remembers it very, very clearly.
Here's this this video, this stuff he was saying about allowing the likes of Reclaim the Streets to flourish.
Absolutely.
Did you try and influence the direction of the planning in any way to make it more palatable to the police?
I would always be looking for a way in which I thought the activists would be given the opportunity to at least snatch a draw, if that makes sense. And I remember that phrase being used.
Can you explain further what you mean by that?
It's not the intention of Special Branch to crush Reclaim the Streets or oppose them. It is our intention to gain full sight of what they're doing in order to provide accurate intelligence in this detail, to form the basis for the policing plan, and I guess ultimately the greater glory of Special Branch management up at the yard. It's not our intention to arrest organisers, to prosecute organisers. It's simply our intention to gain full coverage over what they're doing. Once we've gained full coverage of what they're doing, and we can see it all, and we can provide a stream of reporting on that, that's game over for us. We'll just sit in that position indefinitely. We don't want to destroy them. In fact, quite the opposite. Having put so much work into getting that sort of access, the irony is that we would want them to flourish.
Can that really be right?
Yeah, it's very right, I'm afraid.
If their events are leading frequently to public disorder,
I'm afraid it is, and it's. It was a cliche I was told about SDS when I was still in the back office, that people notice that once SDS become heavily involved in groups, they tend to flourish.
Yeah, I'm not buying that.
I mean,
so it was after
setting aside the arrogance. There's stuff that we have seen, and which is the RTS witness statement published yet? Okay.
Don't be ridiculous.
No, I mean, like, if only, I mean, like, I was
ago.
informed by Kyle told me with a straight face week last Wednesday that it would be published along with all the other statements over the next few days, hopefully before the weekend, certainly with plenty of time for you to do your video before we return for more hearings.
Reclaim the Streets were told it would be published. Originally, we were told on the same day as Roger gave evidence. Then we were told it would be all published on the same day as Jim Boyling gave evidence. Then we were told it would be published on the last day of Jim Boyling's evidence, which was, well over a week. And
it still hasn't been published. But I'm going to talk about this anyway because I know it's in the opening statements. It's utter nonsense what Jim Boyling is saying, because what we see immediately after Reclaim the Street, after J18, which they have decided to go ahead for the greater glory, as he said, of Scotland Yard in their turf war with the City of London Police. What you then see is a police conspiracy to undermine and harass and prevent RTS from being able to spread its message and get its ideas across. And the beginnings of this you actually see in 1997 when you have 3 people are arrested and 20,000 copies of a newspaper are seized by the police using SDS intelligence in order to know where to go and how to find those newspapers before they can be distributed to commuters the day before the March for Social Justice. What you see immediately after J18 is Boyling himself in discussions with managers about the appropriateness of raiding print shops in order to seize publicity material for the forthcoming May Day demonstrations, and lists of activists being drawn up for harassment by uniform. And you have comments from Special Branch talking about how Uniform are going to be delighted to be let off the leash by Special Branch and allowed to harass people. And there is a very, and, coming at it from the other side, having lived through those final years of Reclaim the Streets and the harassment and the burnout and the energy that was sucked out of that group by the levels of overt policing and harassment that we were experiencing, to find out that that was all being planned and plotted by undercover police who were on the inside, selecting the best people for that harassment to be directed at and in order to undermine the group. I mean, it's just utter bollocks what he's saying about them being allowed to flourish. But what it does show is that they were deciding, is it better for us for this group to go ahead? Is it better for us if this group's political actions are successful or not? And the cynicism of that, you know, the deciding factor on whether a group was going to be targeted for harassment and undermined, or whether a group's actions were going to be allowed to go ahead, or whether information was going to be passed to the public order police in order to try and prevent that happening, was being made on the basis of the self-interest of a small group of political police inside Special Branch for the greater glory of their managers at Scotland Yard, as he said. I mean, yeah, the political implications of it, you know, the evidence still hasn't been properly aired and made public by the inquiry, but I think it's going to take a lot of unpacking to look at what happened there. You're muted, I think, Tom.
Yeah. So there's a clip here where he talks about the rest of those three, and kind of goes into a bit about that. I'll just play that.
Did you discuss the arrests of these three men with your managers?
Well, I've reported it. It looks like here. So
yeah, you've
yes.
certainly reported it. Did you discuss the arrests?
What, beyond the report?
Yes.
Possibly, but I don't recall that specifically.
Was there any discussion about what the arrest of these three men in the presence of an undercover police officer meant? No. Going to move now to the criminal proceedings which followed these arrests. Okay. This is a draft, unsigned witness statement about the incident. Is it right that you, in fact, must have had a conversation with Mr. Schwartz, provided a witness statement and been sent a draft?
No.
Can you help us?
That wasn't the clip I thought it was. Sorry, I do apologise. I thought it was I just watched the beginning of it and hadn't watched the rest of it. So I'll leave that stuff we've covered already. I do apologise. But I mean, just to say that there's a whole sequence of stuff that kind of kicks up with the arrest of the three, with the copies of the evading standards. There's a whole sequence there which kickstarts a whole bunch of stuff. There's a lot, actually. I thought that a lot of stuff was said in public that actually was enclosed. So the kind of thing I was teeing up to say, I probably can't say. We should probably just move on from that before I breach a restriction.
Yeah, I've been very careful to stick to what we put in our opening statements, because basically from now on, I think until we get to the Rule 10 questions,
pretty much there is a small section. Yeah. So we then go to lunch on Tuesday, and with very little announcement, like kind of pre-warning. We go into the hearing thinking we're going to be able to report on it, and it appears there is a blanket restriction order. We were given the impression that the next hearing would be the next session of the hearing would be specifically about the matter which is of material concern to a number of core participants whose privacy should be respected. That was included. However, there was an enormous amount of other stuff that was talked about that was not covered by normal restriction orders, but is now caught up in this blanket restriction order. I started off the afternoon thinking, oh, well, this is fair enough. I wouldn't want this stuff coming out if I was implicated in it either. You know, I understand. And then I just got increasingly frustrated as they went over numerous other topics. And this is partly because of Barr's approach, which is to pivot, which is totally understandable, but I feel that the inquiry could have worked much better. I got the impression perhaps it was because they didn't trust Boyling to not blurt out something as they jumped between topics. And I think, hopefully in the fullness of time, when a redacted transcript is published or a edited video is published, then people will get a sense of how difficult he was being through this whole process. So there's nothing we can report of the rest of the day of Tuesday or the morning of Wednesday. I did some videos sort of updating people that I couldn't say anything. Very frustrating. But the next point we're able to report was from the afternoon session of the Wednesday. So it was a little bit before the Rule 10 questions. There was a couple of bits about his deployment before we got to Rule 10s. There was some stuff about the way in which the reporting meetings in the safe house were operated, and a bunch of questions about some of the other areas of deployment that his fellow officers who were deployed at the same time as him were reporting on. This led to this question, which was about Stephen Lawrence.
In February 1997, the verdict in the Stephen Lawrence inquest was announced. Was the Stephen Lawrence case something that came up in conversation in the SDS?
Never, to my knowledge.
Are you sure about that?
Well, I'm sure about my knowledge of it.
Are you able to help us with what the reaction within the SDS was to the Stephen Lawrence inquest?
None whatsoever that I remember. I don't think it impinged upon us at all, to my recollection.
Was there ever any talk of Stephen's death being exploited by the far left?
No.
In July 1997, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry was announced. What sort of views were expressed within the SDS about that development?
None whatsoever.
Are you sure that nothing was said about it at all?
I don't remember anybody saying anything at the meeting about it or in my presence about it. I think everybody knew that whole area would have been particularly toxic. I wasn't aware of any involvement for police. I mean, I don't mean that disrespectfully for police. I don't recall it ever coming up at a meeting. Certainly not in the main meeting. It might have come up at a separate meeting for the people working the left wing, but I wouldn't have been at that meeting.
In June 1998, the then 5 suspects appeared in front of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, and there was disorder outside, at which we understand HN81 was present. Was that an occasion which was talked about in any way at SDS meetings?
Never in my presence, or that I was aware of.
Did anybody express any view, one way or the other, about that dramatic event?
The same answer.
In February 1999, the Macpherson report was published with a finding that not only was the murder investigation deeply flawed, but there was also institutional racism. What was your reaction to the Macpherson report?
I didn't have a reaction to the Macpherson report.
None whatsoever?
No.
Despite it being a toxic subject for the police?
I've never had any involvement in Lawrence or Macpherson or any tasking of it, nor have I discussed it. It's just not an area I've ever impinged upon at all.
That's not what I'm asking.
Well, it isn't, but I think it answers your whole series of questions. I was trying to help you.
I'm asking whether you had an opinion.
No.
Did any of your SDS colleagues express any opinion?
No.
None whatsoever?
Not that I remembered, not in my presence, same answer.
What was the opinion of your managers, then HN58 and HN53?
Same answer.
Did they say anything at all about this important report?
Same answer.
The inquiry has had evidence from some of your former colleagues to the effect that these questions were the subject of discussion and opinions.
Not by me or in my presence.
Are you certain of that?
Yeah, I would have remembered that, I think.
Why would you have remembered if it didn't matter to you very much?
for the reason that I gave, that from the policing point of view, it's a big subject. I find it quite strange that this has become a big thing. If there was any aspect involving that section, I genuinely was not aware of it. It was never discussed in my presence. I don't remember being aware that anybody was involved in it. I can't be more comprehensive in my answer than that.
Yeah, he can't be more comprehensive. He doesn't know nothing. Honest, Gov. Honest. Not me, mate. No, not for a second. Not I. No, never heard of it. Stephen who? Stephen Lawrence. Strange. Strange it became a big deal, Stephen Lawrence. Very strange. I mean, just like incredibly unconvincing, I thought. I mean, he was also asked about the sexual relationships of some of the other undercover officers who he was deployed at the same time as, most notably Mark Jenner, who we heard of from just before Christmas. He said that, yeah, he was aware of all of it, that they discussed it. He doesn't know if it was widely known. He didn't see it being his place to tell fellow SDS officers not to have sex with activists. He was obviously in a mood. I mean, you can see a sense of the mood he was in that clip, and that mood continued. He said it didn't bother him meeting S, the wife of Mark Jenner, whilst Jenner was in a relationship with Alison at the Christmas party. He didn't see why that was an issue. Sorry, Kate.
No, I just wanted to say in relation to that clip and hearing Jenner named, it's worth remembering Jenner's reaction to similar questions, because Jenner quite clearly had heard about the findings of institutional racism against the Metropolitan Police. He quite clearly had discussed the implications and the what the commissioner was saying about it, and the significance of the Lawrence inquiry to the Metropolitan Police, which was absolutely massive. The idea that Boyling doesn't really understand why this is even part of the conversation is utterly disingenuous. But Jenner's response, and I suspect this is actually much more honest and much more reflective of the conversations that were going on in the SDS at this time, was absolute fury at the betrayal of the commissioner, who had accepted the idea that there was institutional racism, and a point-blank refusal to engage with any of this. And I mean, I think it's worth remembering that in the aftermath of the Macpherson inquiry, race relations training for police officers became mandatory. It was obligatory to show up to the diversity and race relations training that was put in place following the Macpherson inquiry. Yet we see no evidence at all that anyone from the SDS ever actually did that. And it's a sign of their exceptionalism, and the fact that they felt that they were above all this. And I think Boyling's answers there are just extremely irritating and extremely disingenuous. And I know, because we've seen Jenner talking about it, that these things were very live issues for everybody in the police at the time, but also for the SDS.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not credible. There was no discussion about it. Like, it's just like, there's nothing believable at all in any of his answers, and he's just so petulant as well. At the same time, it's like really pathetic. He was then asked about the trips to Amsterdam and to Las Vegas. He claimed that none of them used any sex workers on either trip, though it seems they had a great time. These SDS jollies. He admitted that he claimed that only himself and Jenner, the two officers who had been questioned about this before, smoked cannabis in Amsterdam. No other SDS officer did, which contradicts what Jenner says, who simply said that Trevor Morris didn't smoke, but everybody else did. There was, we had the whole stuff which we said earlier about the apology and the attitudes towards women. He says he talks about being bitter and that he was demonized by the job that he did. The responsibility for deceitful sexual relationships lies with a combination of people, but he didn't actually include himself in this combination. He was asked about his psychometric profiling from the start of his deployment. He said that it's clear that over the last 20 years his judgment has been unsound. that was pretty. He claimed he never spoke to any of the other undercover officers about what was being said at the inquiry, but he had spoken to them, what to say at the inquiry, but about the inquiry in general. He said it was mostly about mental health. He was asked to name them. He didn't want to do so. He had to be pushed on this. He then wrote it down. Mitting had to intervene to say, yes, it is important. Then we had the Rule 10 questions. So there was ones about the way in which the SDS and the National Public Order Intelligence Unit sort of coexisted in the field. Then being told about an MPORU officer, he said that when he knew one was turning up to a London Greenpeace meeting he was at, that was Rob Richardson. He said he wasn't told who it would be, but it was obvious immediately to his trained eye who it was. He said that the SDS viewed the MPORU as rivals, and other examples of this internal turf war. There were no proper meetings between the SDS and the MPORU about upcoming demonstrations, so they wouldn't necessarily coordinate in any way if they were both going to be there. He said there was bad feeling between the SDS and the Covert Functions Unit, which was the main undercover unit for the Met that ran criminal undercover investigations. It was put to him that Rosa's position was that if she had known right at the start that he was an undercover officer, she would have never had sex with him. He says that once she did know, that they got back together, they got married and had 2 children. He said he doesn't want to undermine his ex-wife, and he's sorry if that's not what people want to hear. At this point, he got into an open slagging match with the public gallery, essentially, shouting at the public gallery about this fact. It was incredibly undignified of him. He said that he was asked about the conversation he had with Bob Lambert about Rosa. He said he got no encouragement or discouragement either way from Lambert. He talked about how kind and supportive Bob Lambert was. I mean, there was some other stuff about Rosa. He was asked about the high maintenance and low maintenance SDS officers. He said that HN1 was a low maintenance SDS officer. He had to write down the names of some of the high maintenance ones.
There was something he said about Rosa that was really indicative, I thought, at this point, because he said that when he first met her, she was working as a waitress in a vegan cafe. Rosa said, no, I never worked as a waitress. That's rubbish. This was somebody he went on to marry and lived with for years. He never managed to work out in all of that time that she was never actually working as a waitress. He's always assumed or believed in his head something about her that's totally false.
I mean, this is just another example that we see over and over again from these officers of seeking to minimize. They seek to minimize the length of time of the relationship. They seek to say that the women came onto them, that it was their choice, not, and that they had these officers who knew the full reality of the situation and essentially had all the power and back room and access to files about the women that they were deceiving and emotionally manipulating, constantly claim that, these women, because, this is going to come up with me as well, made the first moves, made the choices, and these poor men simply had no choice but to go along with it. And there is this key point about undercover officers deceiving women into relationships, which is they try to make out that the women that they deceived were not significant to their operations, were not part of the movements that they were spying on. This was in no way a tactic either to improve their legend or to gain access or to gain information. There's this idea over and over again, and we see it over and over again from Jim Boyling about, these were genuine relationships with genuine feelings that happened in the context, in this unfortunate context of other stuff that was going on, but it had nothing to do with their deployments. And this claim, I was there at the time. I knew Rosa. She was part of the Reclaim the Streets milieu. She had been involved in milieu. She'd been involved in a lot of the activist stuff that was happening around that time. It's just utter nonsense, and slightly reminiscent of a song lyric. And yeah, I think it's really important to say that Rosa has not actually had the opportunity yet to give evidence. And I very much hope that we will be hearing from her in the future, and there will be because
so the inquiry has said that in June there will be space for her to give evidence. That's been indicated to her. Whether that will actually go ahead, as has been the opportunity has been given, as supposedly it was a, we're not sure. We wait and see. It could go either way. I get the impression very much it could go either way.
But yeah, sorry. I think it's really important to say that you know, I don't want to talk about Rosa's relationship with Boyling, but don't take anything that he says at face value until we've heard her evidence, is the only thing that I would say about it.
Yeah, very much, very much. That was the end of the evidence. You know, as is the case with Rule 10s, they sort of peter out as opposed to crescendoing like the pre-prepared questions. I had to go back for a private meeting, a private disciplinary meeting with Mitting about my reporting restriction, the restriction orders that I broke. As it turned out, I am not to be blamed, which is the big takeaway from that. But I am. There's now been a blanket. There's been another statement issued to everybody who attends the hearings about the importance of respecting reporting restriction orders, which I'm sure we will all take to heart.
Well, there isn't actually I saw the email saying that there was going to be one, but there isn't one.
I mean, it's like, I mean, you know, a message direct to Victoria O'Brien of the Public Inquiry, sending an email saying, reminding people that restriction orders must be obeyed to the letter, and that there will be something about this put on the inquiry website. I haven't seen it. I certainly haven't been alerted to it. That there will be a single point of conflict if anybody has conflict. Single point of contact if anybody has queries about this, with no information about what that single point of contact is. I mean, it was a shocking email that basically and provided no clarity at all about what the restriction orders actually refer to. I mean, you know, it's making it preposterously difficult to report on this inquiry. I mean,
just to say, I mean, some of these restrictions
completely officious and not contain any useful information at the same time, and that is a ridiculous approach to be taking to something that, of course, it is important to protect people's privacy. Everybody on this call would absolutely respect if we were in a position to understand what things are supposed to be restricted and what are not. But telling people anything that was mentioned in a particular time frame and then not providing any information about what was inside or outside of that time frame is completely insane.
That's what happened, I think, on day one. Actually, there was something popped up saying, oh yeah, anything mentioned in these 2 or 3 minutes. But those of us who are watching from elsewhere don't have access to any kind of transcript with timings on it. We can't go back and repeat. We don't have, if we're watching on the webinar.
We don't have that in the room either.
We don't have that in the room either. And I think
if you had a photographic memory and you were in the room, you'd have more of a chance of remembering what was happening at 11:16 or whatever. But we have no chance at all of remembering. It's totally fucked up.
I mean, there's also another layer to it where sometimes the broadcast is suspended. There is no formal reporting restriction order put in place. But there is a suggestion that something might be breached during that suspended broadcast, time when the broadcast is suspended. I use my judgment during those periods about reporting, and that has always been a collaborative process with the inquiry. Victoria O'Brien has taken an entirely different approach. She seems to be under the impression that anything that happens during those time periods is already covered by a reporting restriction order. I mean, I don't think that is the case. I'm sure that's something we're going to get into conflict with over the next weeks and months ahead. But there are lots of times where, I mean, this is why I've had multiple meetings now with the chair, and it's been pointed out that I haven't actually broken any reporting restriction orders willfully at any point. And I think it's very noticeable that this escalation in problems has purely come from one assistant solicitor to the inquiry. But, you know, and we've had a comment from Emma Wallace. You'd wonder how they'd feel if they got into a long-term relationship with a woman and found later they'd been deceived into who they actually were and whether that would feel significant. Of course, they deny it, but the dismissal of those relationships is galling. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if any of these men have any real true feelings. I mean, we shouldn't get into dehumanizing anybody, but yeah, bastards. So, I mean, that was the end of the hearing. I'm aware we've been going for 2 hours and 45 minutes, which is 45 minutes longer than I hoped this broadcast would take. And it's such a short amount of stuff to cover compared to other weeks. So I feel these broadcasts are likely to be very long. Just a quick sum up then of what we've heard. I mean, Bristle KRS has been with us. You've spoken the least, so I'd really like to hear any comments or any thoughts you had about Boyling in general.
Sure. I mean, one thing that did crop up early on is where he was emphasising all the time I was there, it was not an all-white unit. I think that opens the door to all sorts of things about which other officers are involved in the unit that haven't been declared, some perhaps TNs. Because Trevor Morris was on his way out as Boyling was on his way in. And Trevor Morris is the only black officer that we're aware of that was working undercover in SDS during that time period. And that also speaks to when he was later discussing how within SDS there was no discussion, no interest in the Stephen Lawrence developments, either at the time of the inquest or at the time of the announcement of the inquiry. So he's emphasizing that it's not just a white lads club, because he's implying that there are black officers, but then we have no sight of any additional officers apart from Morris. We can presume that many of the officers that have full anonymity and don't even have cryptonyms are the ones covering the far right because of the absence of full reporting of the groups that are being covered. But it seems unlikely that there are any black officers covering the far right at that time. So yeah, that kind of a hint of a kernel of interest there. And then also Boyling seemed to be driving a little bit of a wedge into the line of there being no prior discussion of sexual relationships. I thought that was very interesting. I think that feels like that's a door that's going to be leaned on a lot more as we go through into the next few witnesses. So very interesting, quite disturbing. You certainly feel uncomfortable if you had to be in the same room as him, but I think there's some valuable insights that were revealed, more from what he wasn't saying or the way he was saying things than the actual substance of his evidence, written or oral. But perhaps the most interesting thing is how he was contradicting himself in his oral testimony with so much of what he put in his written testimony. So minimizing the length of relationships, yet that doesn't correlate with the specific dates he's putting on the start and the end of relationships. So the relationship with Monica, he dates it April to October 97. That's a full 6 months, and he's trying to minimize it as always, just very casual, like maybe a few times we had a sexual relationship. So and then the relationship with Ruth from November 97 to August 99, that's a long relationship, and yet that's the area he has been thinnest on providing any direct evidence in his written or oral testimony about how that might relate to Ruth. So I thought that was quite interesting as well, just the context of what he's not saying and the way that he's not saying things.
Yeah. There's something else he hinted at about there being more female officers in the unit when he was in it, who obviously we don't know about either, so let's assume they've been given anonymity. But there's one thing I really wanted the inquiry to ask him more about, which is he claimed that other female SDS officers had used an excuse so they didn't have to get into relationships with the activists they were involved with. And the excuse they used was that they'd had, previous traumatic relationship experiences of some kind, but he felt he couldn't use that because he was a guy. But we don't know anything. Like, how did he even know that that's the excuse they used if nobody in the unit ever discussed these relationships or the tactics and techniques they used to deceive people? And who were these women and what movements were they in? We have no idea. There's a load of stuff like that we have we'll probably never find out about.
Yeah. There's always so many things. That we just had another comment. There are almost definitely black officers infiltrating carnival, arts groups and entertainment more generally, given the police history and reputation management. I mean, I wouldn't dispute that. I mean, I think we should always remember that there's more than just the SDS when it comes to infiltration by the police. There's, I mean, the inquiry is very limited in its terms of reference. We often get little hints to other units, other aspects of the wider sort of policing of society and political policing. That goes much bigger than the SDS and the NPORU.
I just wanted to say, as we approach 3 hours of talking, that the testimony of Jim Boyling was cut short on 3 days instead of 4, and that the Rule 10 questions themselves, you talked about them fizzling out, but our understanding is that he was told to finish. And it's an incredibly frustrating process. And I was given the opportunity to put specific questions, suggest specific questions, and I had, I think, 3 or 4 pages, and was told to cut it down to 2 or 3 questions, of which one got asked really, really badly. And oh my God, it's such a frustrating process, leaving so many unanswered questions when he steps down and he's not come, as far as he might come back for questions from Rosa, I don't know. But basically those questions are now going to remain unanswered. Or even unasked, more importantly.
Yeah, it is just, echoing that, it is an incredibly frustrating process. I've got 212 people watching, 22 have liked. Please share, like, all that stuff. Sorry, it's so cringe. Really makes a difference. All the pointing that Ben's doing, all those things. I know it's, even though that by the time you're watching this, maybe it's no longer live, but please, it would be really helpful if you to do that. We return on Monday with HN3, Jason Bishop. This was someone who initially was only down for 1 day. The meeting referred to his deployment as unremarkable. Thankfully, he seems to have done a bit of a U-turn on that, and now will be coming back for a second day on the Thursday. He'll be sharing that day with Lois Austin, who's also returning. So it won't be 2 full days of evidence, but it will be more than the initial 1 day that he was initially scheduled for. Then we'll be hearing from Donna McLean and Lindsay, both of whom were deceived by HM104, Carlo Saraki, who used the cover name Carlo Neri when he infiltrated anti-fascist groups, including No Platform, in the early 2000s. If there's nothing else anybody would like to add, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us for this. An edited version of this broadcast will be turned into an audio-only podcast. I don't know when the hell I'm going to get that out, because we're about to literally leave here. Well, actually, I'm going to watch France versus Italy. But after that, I'm going to London for the next week of the inquiry. It's going to be very busy. Thanks for joining. Please follow the hearings as they happen. You just follow the hashtag SpyCops on whatever platform you prefer. I do live updates on Twitter during the hearings. We broadcast videos on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube. These videos last for posterity on the Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance YouTube channel. The podcast series, SpyCops Info Podcast, comes out fairly regularly. This is what this will end up as. You can find links to all these things and a great deal more at spycops.info. Thanks for joining. See you all again next week. Bye for now.